I've gone from being an analyst to actually being a partner, so having a piece of the equity. I also become aware that illegal insider trading is going on. I get a phone call. Kronos was going to be acquired. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. She's like, oh, I'm going to make millions on this. Could you just take care of him? Could you write him a check for $10,000? And he's sliding me the FedEx envelope with cash over. So July 2008, I'm dropping off my dry cleaning. This guy on the sidewalk in Manhattan says, are you Tom? I turn around. We think that you can help us out. So a hedge fund, what we did was we traded stocks, and hedge funds charge usually a 1% to 2% management fee on the assets that you manage to cover the overhead expenses, salaries, and costs. And the hedge funds also get to keep 20% of profits. So if you're up $50 million that year, you get to keep $10 million and divide that as bonuses. So in my early 20s, I loved leaving investment banking, which was just sort of focused on servicing clients, and getting into the game where I'm actually seeing my percentage of the profits off my stock trades like calculated in Excel. And at 23, 24, 25 years old, that starts to become a number I've never seen in my life.
Right.
I mean, it starts to become a big number. And so that's happening. I loved it because it was a meritocracy, I called it. There wasn't politics. Hey, you pick the right stocks, you're going to make a lot of money.
Right.
If you don't, you're going to get fired. And I liked actually having the scorecard there real time, but that can also lead to making other decisions, which we'll talk about, and other pressures. So there's this need for short-term performance. We have investors who want to make money every quarter, so we need shorter-term opportunities, to kind of make money in the short term too. There was 12 analysts at my first firm, so it's sort of like an NBA team where these young people making a lot of money, you can be replaced very easily if you start sort of missing your free throws, picking bad stocks.
Right.
We had the brokers we were their clients, so like the Goldman Sachs would take us to like the Kentucky Derby, hang out in the tent, or the Super Bowl. One of our traders was playing like flag football with Michael Vick at the Super Bowl. Like, so those really neat opportunities in your 20s to have those trips, but also a lot of pressure to perform.
How long were you there before something tragically went wrong?
Yeah, that's quite a phrase. Yeah. So at my first firm, it closed around the dot-com crash, 2002, 2003. I traded my own account for other firms for a few years. And then I finally got my second job in 2006, where I was hired as a junior partner by a senior partner who was starting a hedge fund. His seed capital came from a legendary value investor named Julian Robertson, which is called Tiger Management. So back in the day, the two biggest names in hedge funds were Julian Robertson and George Soros, which has a different connotation today,
right,
obviously. But those were the biggest names at the time. And so this guy was my mentor, probably 20 years older than me, and said, hey, Julian Robertson's giving me money. I'd love for you to be my junior partner. So now I'm 28. I mean, anybody at Wharton in my class would have loved to have this opportunity. So now I'm in this position to potentially make a bunch of money, because now I've gone from being an analyst to actually being a partner, so having a piece of the equity. But around the mid-2000s now, I also become aware that illegal insider trading is going on. And I get to define that too, because people hear the term insider trading. What is it? And so insider trading is buying or selling stocks on information that's material, non-public, and then you get because somebody breached their duty to their client or the company. So materiality would be if the information was public, it would move the stock price. Non-public, public is obviously pretty clear.
Right.
And so an example would be, I'm from a small town in New Jersey. If I talk to the Starbucks there and said, how'd your sales go this quarter? And he tells me the exact information, I can't trade Starbucks stock because it's one store in New Jersey.
Right.
If I fly to Seattle, play golf with Howard Schultz and say, Howard, what revenue and what earnings did you make last quarter? And he tells me, I can trade the stock long or short because Wall Street has estimates that they're expecting these companies to either beat or miss. And so if you know that the company is going to beat those estimates or miss those estimates, you could be long the stock if they're going to beat the estimates, or short the stock if you're going to miss. So that's kind of what's illegal inside information. That's kind of what the definition is.
Have you ever gone online and searched your name and seen how many data brokers have your information available for sale? These brokers sell your information to spammers, scammers, and anybody that's targeting you. In my day, I had to go out and either survey people, make phone calls, run ads to gather all this type of information. Your name, date of birth, email address, home address, relatives information, but all of that is available online through brokers. That's why I use Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura automatically shows me the brokers that have my information and have it available for sale, and they automatically fill out an opt-out request for me. Cleaning up my information helps reduce the amount of spam that I get and protects me from hackers who could use that information to get access to my social media accounts, my bank accounts, and other sensitive information. Recently, AT&T revealed that over 73 million customer records have been released on the dark web. AT&T is recommending that those affected use stronger passwords, monitor their account activity, and consider credit freezes or fraud alerts from credit bureaus. Well, Aura does all this for me. And best of all, I don't have to download several different apps just because a company couldn't keep my data secure. If my information was compromised in the AT&T data breach, I wouldn't be worried because Aura is always on. It's always protecting me. I value my privacy and yours. All you have to do is go to aura.com/Matt to start your 2-week free trial. Also, we're going to leave the link in the description box.
You start working for this company.
Yeah.
And how, like, and I'm assuming everything's going okay. Like, how long does that happen before?
Right.
And you understand that you're now starting to realize, like, there's insider trading going on that, and like, I know you had said, on the other podcast that like there were some firms out there where it was almost known that this is their business model.
Yes.
These guys go kind of like the have you ever seen Wolf of Wall Street? Oh,
Yeah.
this is gonna make okay.
Yeah.
You know, the Bud Fox character, right? The Charlie Sheen plays him, the young kid.
Oh, the Wall Street movie from the 80s.
Yeah, from the 80s.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Because that's a great example,
Yeah,
right?
Wolf of Wall Street was Belfort.
Yeah.
Did I say Wolf of Wall
Yeah,
Street?
yeah,
Yeah.
Well, I've seen Wolf of Wall Street. I haven't seen whatever you're talking about.
Oh,
Yeah. Right. Again, this is
Okay.
back in the 80s. Yeah.
What did I say? I said Wolf.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Just Wall Street. So
Yeah.
Wall Street, the first movie, which was that's the Bud Fox is the main guy played by Charlie Sheen when he was young before he went crazy, and Gordon Gekko is the main guy, right? Or Gordon Gekko's his boss, but basically Gordon Gekko gets like your story so reminds me of this, where Gordon Gekko manages a hedge fund or his own money. I think he manages probably a huge hedge fund, right?
Yeah, I think at the time it was like with a hedge fund or institutional money, it's clients' money. Yeah.
And what he's doing is he's buying companies and then he's buying them and bankrupting them or whatever, and he's selling off the companies. He's longing stock, shorting stock, whatever. He's investing money, right? But he gets this one kid named Bud Fox, and Bud Fox is a stockbroker who's desperately trying to kind of land him as a client. And so he lands him as a client, but Gekko starts telling him, like, look, I need winners. Not sometimes, not an average of you being a winner, picking winning stock. I need winning stock tips every single time you come to me. And if you have to go out and get that, by insider trading or whatever, he's like, and that's what you have to do to work with me. If not, kick rocks. And Bud Fox is making whatever $50,000 a year. 30 years ago, probably 100, the equivalent of 150. He's living in a fucking shitty, little tiny efficiency. And he just kind of buckles. He's like, fuck. He's like, that's insider trading. He's like, but I'll do whatever I have to do. And I always love not to go off, but he actually comes up with an ingenious thing. He ends up buying into a cleaning company that cleans all of these law firms that represent these huge companies, so he can basically go into the law firms at night and pilfer their files and find out what's going on, get that information and use it. So that's one of the ways he does it, obviously.
Yeah.
Great movie.
Yeah.
But he gets in huge trouble, obviously. He blows up. He's doing amazing stuff. Starts dating Daryl Hannah, which was really hot then.
At the time.
Gets a huge condo and it all ends up coming down, all around him. But great movie. It'd be great for if you watch that movie, it'd be great for the hook in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's an arrest scene.
Yeah.
There's Gekko. I'm telling you, there's all these great Wall Street scenes. I mean, it's perfect.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And the first sort of insider trading arrest in the real industry happened in the 80s and 90s with Michael Milken was a big name, Ivan Norsky.
Right.
And so insider trading prosecution picked up then. So now in the mid-2000s, I know what's going on. I know my competition's doing it. I never felt I'd be in the position to get that information because usually you had to have contacts inside these Silicon Valley companies, these tech stocks who were leaking information. And so what some hedge funds do who had it as their business model was they would hire a stock analyst from a Yahoo or a Microsoft or a Cisco who could call back to their contacts at the company and say, hey, either what companies are you going to buy because we'll buy those stocks, or here's what Wall Street is thinking you're going to have for this quarter for their earnings. What are you actually going to do? And so I didn't have those connections. I was just really good with Excel, valuing companies, picking my Google and my Yellow Page ideas, but that was going to be long term. At my second firm, we lost money the first quarter of investing, which shouldn't have mattered because we were investing over a 1 to 3 year horizon.
All right.
Now, one of the pivotal moments is my boss came into my office after that first quarter. He said, I know we're investing longer term, Tom, but we just lost money in the first quarter. We're a small startup. He's sweating. He's like, we got to start looking for opportunities to make money every month, or we may not survive. Now, when any goal in any business goes from 1 to 3 years to monthly, the opportunity to start cutting corners certainly increases.
Right.
And I'd also say, for a lot of industries, it's like that ambiguous message from the boss to just do what it takes.
Right.
And me as the young employee, not asking clarifying questions. Do we mean anything goes, or am I going to start to dig into what we know the competition's doing? Like, I didn't ask anything. I just assumed, all right, if I was to get inside information, I'll probably do it because
run with it, yeah.
Because he said anything goes. So only a few more months after he's in my office, I get a phone call from a woman who worked for a guy named Rajaratnam. So if people look him up, he's probably one of the most famous guys we talked about, who's later charged for insider trading. And I think he was sentenced to 11 years later. She worked for him. And so I knew her through the industry, as I know other analysts at this time. We talk about stock ideas. I suspected she was probably insider trading, but so the way it works is like, you wouldn't give me an insider stock tip unless you knew that I could give you something back, like a quid pro quo,
right,
or reciprocation. Otherwise, why would you share the information with me? It's like, oh, because you're my friend. Like, there's probably some back and forth. That's how it happened. So she calls me and she says, Tom, you'd made me a lot of money over the last few years on these great ideas, these longer term ideas I mentioned that I was working on. She's like, I've got something for you, but you have to promise me you can't tell anybody. Now, that should have set off a red flag,
right?
Or at least a yellow flag, like, okay. But I'm now intrigued, like, what is it? She's like, okay. So a Moody's analyst, so not to get too technical, but they rate corporate bonds, Moody's, who was roommates with her cousin.
Moody's and
S&P, it's a duopoly. So if a company is issuing a bond to raise money.
No, I know who Moody's is, but then there's another company too.
S&P. Moody's and S&P are the two companies.
Man, I think I feel like, are they the ones that also, like in the mortgage, during the mortgage crisis, was they were giving like people the AAA ratings for
Oh yeah, actually it was probably Moody's. We could look it up, but they rate bonds, and so it was probably actually
That I was going to say that's one of the reasons it because I remember they were one of the companies that when they were having these what was it, I forget what they called them, the tranches of bonds for the mortgages were going and say, oh, this is just AAA, and they're like. Yeah. And they weren't AAA, but
the mortgage-backed securities, the MBS, exactly, that caused all the crisis in 08, 09. So Moody's, an analyst at this company who was roommates with her cousin, told her that one of their clients, Kronos, this tech stock, was going to be acquired in a few weeks. Here's the date. Here's the price. Here's the private equity firm. Very specific information.
Right.
Up to this point, I knew her to be kind of a rumor monger. There's a lot of rumors go on in the stock market. Oh, this is happening. Most of the time it's BS, but it sounds like very explicit information. When I speak at a college today, I say, imagine the answers to the test just fell in your lap.
Right.
Like, this sounds like this is going to happen.
So why?
So I'll get to it later.
Sorry.
Yeah, so she shares it with me. And at first I'm thinking she's doing this because we're friends. She's known me for years. I have made her money on these longer term ideas. Maybe she's paying me back. And we had talked about it, even with my boss, that like, we know insider trading is going on. Right. And so like, oh my God, now I'm actually in possession of this information. I still had a moral compass. I'm like, all right, well, I don't do this. But later that day, I'm talking to a friend at another firm. He's at what's called a prop trading firm. So you eat what you kill. If you're down that month, you're not getting paid. If you're up, you get your percent. He's down that month. We're talking. And we talk once a month, not a close friend. He's like, dude, are you hearing anything out there I could trade? I'm down. And I'm like, bro, I'm not trading this, but just so you know, this woman I know just called me and told me this Moody's analyst told her this company, Kronos, is going to be acquired in a few weeks. So just pausing right there, I could actually be charged by the SEC, the market police, for tipping this information. And I haven't traded yet. And now I have no idea what he's going to do with it. Within an hour, he tells another guy at his firm who apparently buys 500,000 shares of Kronos and call options. So call options is like a leverage bet on the stock. So if the stock goes up 20%, you might make 100, 200% on the stock. And so he's doing it. The woman that called me, she has her entire brokerage account, she told me, in the stock for this event, which probably wasn't smart. And so I still haven't traded yet, but I'm starting to get, I think, Matt, like a little like FOMO, like, fuck, I got this information.
Right.
She's going to make millions. This guy's going to make millions. This guy he told is going to make a lot of money. But I'm still holding out until he calls me back and says, dude, did you buy some? Like, we are all in. Everybody here is in. And there's this thing.
One conversation, just one brief conversation, you know?
Yeah. And so there's this thing, the fraud triangle, when the employee crosses that line, there's the opportunity, the need to do it, and the rationalization.
Right.
So the need was there for the short-term performance. The opportunity for me to do this was, I'm the junior partner. I can buy a stock in our portfolio and not even have to talk to the boss as long as less than 1% of the assets we manage for clients. So if we manage $100 million, I could buy a $999,000 position in the stock. So it's like, this is an idea I'm working on. It's a new idea. I'm going to do some more research. So I calculate and buy a 0.9% position in the portfolio. And I'm sure you know, I rationalized it. Like I said, well, these other guys are making millions. I'll just buy a small amount just to play along, just to take some breadcrumbs off the table. I felt it was like dropping a rock in the Grand Canyon. Like, if this were to ever be flagged by the SEC, I'm the last guy they would look at because these guys are making millions. Like, if this plays out, it'll help us a little bit, and it'll help the short-term performance my boss wants. I said, who am I hurting?
Nobody was going to say nobody's getting hurt.
Nobody's getting hurt.
It's about people helping people.
Exactly. It's just you know, I'm just buying it before everybody else realizes what's going on. With insider trading, it's easy to rationalize victimless crime. As you said, it's not like a Ponzi where you're giving me money and I'm spending it on something else or giving it to somebody else. Like, just buying it before everybody else. I said, I'm just taking a flyer. So I'm using a euphemism for the conduct. So I didn't say I'm insider trading. I'm like, taking a flyer is a small position. That's like taking a small position, a flyer. Right. So I'm starting to sort of distance myself psychologically. Like, and I said, I'll just do it this one time. It's never just once.
Yeah, yeah.
And so all these sort of, the rationalizations happen as they do with a lot of people. And I thought, you know what? I really have no idea who she's talking to. She could be full of shit. I don't know who she's talking to. I'll do it one time. So extremely poor self-talk, as it often is in these situations.
Right.
But I also say, I think, in my corporate talks today, I talk about the idea of like making a decision in isolation. I didn't talk to my boss. I certainly didn't talk to compliance. I didn't talk to anybody at my firm. I made the decision on my own to cross that line. I didn't ask any clarifying questions. Can we do this or not? And so I realized, and the way I equate this in my head, and people I'm sure will disagree, I'm like, my whole life I've broken laws. Like, I speed. In college I did Napster. Like, I know it's not the same thing, but it's like, well, I know it's illegal, but I'm just doing it a little bit. So that rationalization is really spiraling. So longer story short, a few weeks later, the stock has halted before the market opens, which means news is coming. And then word for word, exactly what she told me. So at first I'm like, maybe it's a rumor, maybe something happened. The stock is up 30%. And I hate to say it, like, I didn't freak out. I got an adrenaline spike in me, like uncontrollable subconscious adrenaline. Like, now I'm part of this illicit in group. And I think for me, why did I do it? Looking back, I'm like, I was very not secure in myself in my 20s. Like, I was always worried these guys are cheating to get ahead. Like, I was drowning in insecurity, I think. And now I was part of that illicit in group. And the next conference I could attend with these guys, I was like, hey, I had Kronos.
Right.
And these guys were like, they were even like, Tom, you do real work. You don't do what we do. I'm like, I know about the next one coming up.
Right.
And so one of the older guys put his arm around me. He's like, now you're one of us. So I think like a lot of it is just not.
Oh, that's all so sinister.
Yeah. It's just like, now I'm part of this group.
Right.
And now I have some status. Now I can, like, puffery. Like, now I can stick my chest out. Hey, Tom's in the know.
Yeah.
And looking back now, I'm like, that's so much of what it was. It's stupid, but like, that's.
Well, it's funny because what we talked about before we started was, it was this, to me, it was whiting out that 30-day late and then being concerned the whole time up, sitting in the file.
Yeah.
3-4 days later, they get the file, they review it, and then they came back. When they come back and they said, you're clear to close, it was like, oh my God, I got away with, like, they didn't catch it.
Yeah.
And then when it closed, and everybody signed and they funded the loan, I always remember because initially it was that I'm just going to do this one thing. My rationalization was this is a single mother.
Yes.
She needs the mortgage. Her son. I'm doing her a favor.
Yeah.
Nobody's getting hurt. She's gonna pay. You see the whole thing.
Yeah.
And then when it worked, I became emboldened by it. And so when, like I said, when the next guy came in and needed his W-2 changed or something, and he could get the loan, I was all in.
Yeah.
Because you're right, that oh my God, this worked, and nobody kicked in the door.
Yeah.
They didn't arrest me. She's happy. I'm happy. This is okay. This is how it's done.
Yes, and I think you get desensitized to it. Like it took a few weeks for this deal to happen. I was sort of thinking about it, but when it happened, and when the guys are like, "Oh, you're one of us," it becomes very easy to do it again. Like once you do it once, doing it again, I'm not even so. It's up 30%. My boss and I are meeting to go through our stock portfolio. My boss sees it. He skips over it. Usually every stock, what do you know? Should we buy some, sell some? Like, what have you learned? Like, he sees it. He doesn't even ask me questions. So to fuel this rationalization further, here's my mentor. He's not even asking me about it. Hey, it's okay. So if this happens again, he could have fired me and said, we don't do this here. What the hell?
Right.
And so that, again, fuels the rationalization.
If he had asked you, well, what's going on? Like this trade, like, wow, what a great trade. How'd you feel?
I would have had to think of something. And I don't know.
I was going to say, did you already have something in your mind?
I didn't have anything really planned.
Right.
Because I probably would have told him, hey, she called me because he knows it's going on too, and kind of figured out how he felt. And so he didn't even want to, he didn't want to know. So he wanted to be sort of the ostrich with his head in the sand. Like the boss that says, don't tell me about your short-term performance. Okay.
Right.
Which is not good. I get back to my desk and my phone rings, and it's this woman who had tipped me. She's like, did you see it? I'm like, yeah, I saw it. She's like, I hope you loaded up. I'm like, well, I bought a little bit. I took a flyer. She's like, oh, I'm going to make millions on this. And oh, by the way, Tom, that Moody's analyst, I gave him your name. Could you just take care of him? Could you write him a check for $10,000? Because he's going to have more of these. And you can imagine when I said, holy shit, what the, like, you gave him my name? He knows who I am? I'm supposed to, I'm not part of this. He's going to be in New York next week. Can you give him a check for $10,000? I'm like, all right, I'm not writing him a check because that's illegal.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, first of all, why would you expect me? Like, we didn't discuss this.
Am I entrapped?
Yeah. Like, why am I writing people checks now? No. We had a conversation. Why am I writing a check? You should have mentioned that up front.
Yeah, exactly. That should have been part of this.
Right.
Or I could have said no and ended the relationship there. Like, I'm not, no, this is done. You're crazy. So I'm like, all right, let me figure it out. He's going to have more. So I call the buddy that I tipped at that firm where they made millions. I'm like, look, this is the situation. Could you maybe get cash together? And he's like, oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
So he gives me a FedEx envelope. So we're at Grand Central, very clandestine. Like he slides the FedEx envelope over to me downstairs. I walk out. This guy in the corner of the street says, are you Tom?
So you're slipping him cash.
Well, he's slipping me. So he gets the $10,000 together from his firm in cash. He's like, let's meet at Grand Central to do the exchange. Two knuckleheads in Grand Central. And he's sliding me the FedEx envelope with cash over, not saying anything. Like, we made it really theatric. I don't know why.
This just went from an innocent phone call where I'm not really involved to super, like, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. Underworld kind of.
Yeah, it was very theatrical. Like that. Like, who's watching? Like, nobody's watching.
It's in the newspaper. I'm walking away.
Yeah, it was almost, so with the FedEx envelope. And I know that this young 22-year-old guy named, I think his name was Deep Shaw, a young Indian guy, is going to be in the corner of the street. And I see out of the corner of my eye, he's like, are you Tom? I just hold it up. I don't even look at him because I'm so disgusted with myself at this point. And one of my tests now, my ethics training is like, if you can't tell your grandmother what you're doing, you probably shouldn't do it.
Right.
So when I'm like, let me go take a shower. Oh, it's just this one time too. So I'm not like. But
so I went the other way. The disgust disappeared immediately. Okay, I was all in.
Well, it does
after that. I was, it was completely. Now I know the truth.
I felt that maybe that afternoon doing it, and then she calls again, and so it would happen again. The third tip in trade was that Hilton Hotels was going to be acquired by Blackstone, and so we're a tech stock focused hedge fund. I'm buying shares of Hilton Hotels.
You're way out of that.
Way out.
Yeah.
And so what actually sets off the SEC investigation later was 10 technology stock hedge funds by Hilton. So if you're going to serve it up on the platter for the SEC, that's one thing you could do. And so the third tip in trade of the four was another tip. Another source of information she had was an investor relations firm where an employee knew the quarterly information for Google.
Are you still giving money?
So
by the
I
way?
didn't do it on the second one. I said, I'm not
okay.
doing this again. On the third one, she's like, I have a news source. This person wants $15,000, and I want to pay her. So I did the same thing with my buddy. The problem is I have to get it to California. And so I'm going to go out there. I'm going to a conference anyways for tech stocks. So I'm going there anyways. I'm like, I'll meet you there, but I have to get it through LaGuardia. So I'm going to LaGuardia Airport in New York. I have $15,000. Talk about like going from one innocent phone call to having it like you put some down your shirt, in your pockets, in your socks. Now it's before the machines that we have today. I walk through, it doesn't go off. I don't know. It didn't go off. I went to the restroom. I put it back in the bank envelopes. I'm like, all right, let me just get on the plane. It's 2007, so I guess there was still TSA would eventually, was still checking people as they walked on the flights, just because 9/11 was 6 years before, and so they're stopping people randomly. Can we just search your carry-ons? And I saw that. I thought they're there for me. Like, why else would they be doing this? I must have been on the cameras in here or something. Oh shit, what am I going to say? And so I don't make eye contact. Group 3 is called the board. That's my group. I'm walking on. They're like, sir, could we see your carry-on? And so the female TSA agent takes it. And I had my laptop, and I had $15,000 in cash in there. And she looks at the other guy, and she's like, have a nice flight. She didn't say anything.
Right.
I didn't know until years later that domestically you can actually carry whatever you want. And I was going to say, I'm going to San Francisco, but I'm going to Vegas later, and I'm bringing the cash.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think it would have been fine, but but I thought it was illegal. So I guess better story. So I sat on the plane. And then that was my oh shit moment. Like, I am never, so I got to California, gave it to her. I'm like, I am never paying cash for this stuff again. You won't believe what happened. I think I almost got caught, but they didn't say anything. And she's like, all right. No more cash payoffs. And so it was 4 trades like this. 2 of them were the cash payoffs.
You're not cut out for this.
No. Exactly. No.
I'm sorry.
I just, it's not my line of work. So I'm like, I'm done doing this. She was like, there's one more. I'll give it to you. It's coming up. Another deal. No cash payoffs. I'll take care of it. I'm like, all right. So 4 trades. They were all these small positions. So I never escalated it. So my boss is looking the other way. I could have bought a lot more. I kept it at 0.9% because he wasn't saying anything. We made $1 million for our investors on the 4 trades. We managed 100 million, so 1%. So we were up 30% without the trades. We're up 31% with so what's the point of even doing it? It's so stupid. I'm not swinging for the fences. I'm just doing it to play along. And now I'm in the in group.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like shoplifting when you've got the cash. I'm about to buy $150 worth of groceries, and I'm going to go ahead and take this Snickers and slip it into my pocket.
Exactly.
It's like, what are you doing?
What are you doing? Yeah.
It's a $2.
Yeah.
Throw it on the counter.
Right. Exactly. Why do it?
Yeah.
And of the $1 million, so my personal take from the crime, which is actually shocking. I guess at 29 years old, what was my price of professional suicide? It's $46,000. That's all I made. $46,000. And when I speak today, there's a professor friend of mine I speak at school. He's like, let's calculate how much future income you give up. I'm like, please don't do that. He's like, I want to show the class. And he gets to $23 million would have been my future income. So he's like, Tom, I'm like, thanks for rubbing it in, but it makes a good point for the students. Like, what's the point, right?
Well, it's what's funny is, and I hate to compare it to this, but it is a comparison. For guys that go to in prison, is like you talk to the drug dealer who, oh man, I was making whatever. And honestly, this is probably high for drug dealers. I was making $30,000, $40,000 a month, and you're like, okay, so how long did you do that? Oh, I did it for 2 years. Okay, and how long did you go to prison? And then you add in the 10 years they did in prison, and then you divide it, and it's like you were making minimum wage, bro.
Yeah.
You would have been better off being free that whole time and working at McDonald's.
Exactly.
But at the time, it doesn't feel like that, and nobody really thinks they're going to get caught.
That's the thing. I never considered the idea of ever being caught, which is pretty clear. I'm not trying to cover it up. I don't even have cover stories. What would I say? And I'm not thinking about, to your point, the money I'm making on the crime. Which when I talk today, people are like, you weren't thinking about the money. I'm like, no, I made $46,000. I never thought I'd be caught. And at the end of 2007, this woman called me. She's like, oh my God, the SEC has contacted me about that Hilton trade. As we said, it really sticks out if you're trading tech stocks. I'm going to tell them I bought Hilton because Paris Hilton's in the news. Now I know I'm dealing with an idiot.
Right.
What? So another expletive tirade from me. But I thought, holy shit, if they're talking to her, I'm probably going to get that phone call. Now, I better have a reason why I bought these stocks. So let me go make up a reason now, months later, why I bought these stocks. And I found random reasons, like there was a brokerage firm that said hotel stocks are cheap. That's why I bought. I'm backdating it.
There was an article, whatever.
And I had heard from other guys I knew that were inquiries from the SEC. They're like, just call them back and say some shit about, like, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, they just want something
They'll
for
leave
the
you
file.
alone. Yeah, exactly.
And
so
you didn't make enough for it to be a massive amount.
Yeah, maybe they'll call me, but like I'm prepared. I have my 4 reasons. And so sort of like, once you like that match, you can't unlike the match. So I can't take the trades away. So I can only try to put that match out. So I'm making this plan. And so I had this plan in place if the phone were to ring from the SEC. But as you know, like Mike Tyson says, everybody has a plan.
Yeah, till you get punched in the mouth.
That's right. That's right. So the SEC doesn't call you just so people know and say, Tom, could you call us back about all that insider trading you did last year?
Right.
Instead, it's July 8th, 2008, middle of the financial crisis, 6:30 in the morning. I'm living in Manhattan, leaving my apartment to go to the office. I have some dry cleaning to drop off, so I'm going to go drop off this dry cleaning.
Well, before you get to that, can you mention that?
Oh, yeah.
We talked about the
Right.
I forget her name.
Yeah, Remy Khan.
Remy
Let me fill
Khan.
that in. Yeah.
And by the way, I also, to interrupt, the Raj thing, and Remy, I think, was interviewed on that. Was like 2020. I remember being in prison watching like a 2020 or 60 Minutes thing on him and her. Oh, was it on
60
her?
Minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And she's talking about how it worked and the whole thing.
So that was 2016. She was on 60 Minutes.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the woman that won 60 Minutes. And so, so the last trade, so she calls me in December of 2007. The SEC has contacted me, Paris Hilton. I told her, oh my God, that's a terrible idea.
Because Paris is in the boardroom saying, this is what we're doing, fellas.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to get taken over by Blackstone. She's working the deal, right? So then we go to June of 2008. And she's like, Tom, I'm going to be in New York. We need to meet because I want to figure out like what I should tell the SEC. I'm going to meet with them more. Like, what should I say? I'm like, all right, let's meet. And I'm trying to figure out cover stories I can tell her for these trades. We meet at a coffee shop by, Rock Center there where the ice skating rink is outside there in Manhattan. So summer, so nobody's ice skating. So we sit down. And she's like, all right, this is what I'm thinking about saying. What do you think we should say? Like, what do you think I should say, Tom? I said, well, here's this report that said hotels were cheap. And she's like, but this was illegal insider trading, right? I'm like, yeah, I know it was illegal insider trading. Now, for you, that's enough. That's what
that was good. For me, it'd be like, what?
Yeah, exactly.
But you realize.
Right. Yeah, talking to the plant. Yeah, exactly. Right. Let's put the plant here. So I'm like, yes, I know that. She's okay. But it's not setting off alarm bells for me. No street smarts, right? So she's like, all right, great meeting. She's thinking great meeting. So
good talk.
Good talk.
Yeah.
Good seeing. So this is what we'll do. Thank you, Tom. And then a week later, the guy that I had tipped at the prop trading firm says, bro, we need to get coffee. And so we get coffee to Starbucks. We sit really close. I'm like, this is like, I guess it's New York City, so it's close or whatever. And he's like, these trades have been weighing on me that we made last year. Like, what would you say? And I didn't put it together. It was just like, this is what I would say. This is actually what I'm going to say. I just told him what I told her. And he's like, but this was illegal insider trading.
Oh my God.
I'm like, yeah, it was. I could have just grabbed it. Yeah, it was. I'm here. So they were wired up. So the woman that called me wearing a wire, the guy that I tipped was wearing a wire. So those are my 2 points. So July 2008, I'm dropping off my dry cleaning. A week after seeing him, this guy on the sidewalk in Manhattan says, are you Tom? I turn around, the wallets are out. So I actually knew what this was at this point. We sit down at a Wendy's.
The wallets are, you mean that they flash, they flash their
the
credentials?
Badges. Yeah, man and female agent, wallets out, the dark suits. Can you come sit down with us? So there's a Wendy's there in Midtown. He's look, man, we know about your 4 trades.
Can I ask you another question?
Yeah.
When they do the boom,
yeah.
How do you feel? Because when we were talking earlier, I was like, oh my God.
No, my face went white, my stomach's turning.
Because it was just had a gut punch, right? Like you didn't see that coming. You didn't.
And I was expecting a phone call from the SEC. I wasn't expecting law enforcement to be involved in this. This was like a regulatory thing,
right.
If anything. So I thought, oh my God, law enforcement, FBI. And so just like face goes white, like just the whole world, comes crumbling down. Let's sit down at this Wendy's. So the mail agent, it's sort of like they were playing good cop, bad cop. He was the bad one. So we know about your 4 trades. We know that you were just down in Atlanta visiting your baby nephew last week for his baptism, and he knew his name. So my head's spinning at this point. It's sort of like that old Charlie Brown cartoon where the teacher's going, well, wah. That's all. I sort of phase out. And I thought, my first thought was, oh my God, my parents are going to kill me. What are they going to say? That's my first thought. Yeah, they're going to be disappointed. And I thought, holy shit, my wife's going to leave me. We just got married. She didn't even know about these trades. Like I didn't tell her. She's going to leave me, which always happens. And then I thought, oh my God, this might impact my career. Oh, you think? Oh my God, I might be going to prison. So it goes from dad to prison. I start making implicating statements. Yes, I made those 4 trades. In fact, these cash payoffs. And he's like, go on.
Cash, did you say?
Yeah. I said LaGuardia Airport, this guy on the street. And the FBI was like, oh. And so he's like, gets his pen out. He's like, go on. I didn't say, prove it. Prove you have something on me. And they probably could have played those recordings from previous weeks. But and it's maybe people have an issue with this. I just thought like the right decisions to start making now would be to just confess everything, which again, I tell people always talk to an attorney. So I just start confessing to the FBI and they're like, all right, let's just calm here. Like pause here, Tom, we got some water for you. Take a sip of water. And they're like, are you aware this is going on in the industry? Do you think it is? I'm like, guys, it's rampantly going on. Like, how do you think I got involved? Like everybody's doing it. And they said, we think that you can help us out. But they didn't tell me who would cooperate on me, but I kind of figured it out. So I was thinking like, how do I even help out and understand? They're like, are you aware it's going on? And I said, yes. And they like pulled out this web of names of the tipping charts with the circles and the arrows, the insider trading cases. They always present this guy called this guy with arrows and circles. And this is the big web we're trying to take down.
Right.
So there's 2 big targets at the top. I assume one of those guys is Raj Rajaratnam, the Sri Lankan billionaire. He folded it up. He gives me his card. He's like, right now, you have the opportunity to help us with these cases. It's going to help you. Then I said, should I talk to an attorney? And the FBI said, we'll let you know when you can do that. We can give you some guidance on that.
So it, like, first, they're not supposed to say that. They're not, you know what I'm saying? And the moment you even say attorney, they're supposed to go, well, if you want to talk to an attorney, by all means, have him like they're supposed to stop everything at that point. You even talk about an attorney or getting an attorney. They're not supposed to persuade you to not get an attorney or suggest it or. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
So I took his card. I didn't say I was going to help him out because I was like, what does help mean? That was a Tuesday morning. They're like, you can only tell your wife. You can't tell anybody else. So how am I going to do that? She's going to leave me. She was working at Lehman Brothers. So that was the one that went under in 2008. So she's under all this stress. It's 2008. She's having a horrible time at work.
So it's in the process of going under at this point.
Yeah, exactly. So it hadn't gone under yet. Tuesday, I get to work late. My boss is like, where were you? I'm like, just rough morning. My face is white, but it's 2008. So my face was white every day the market's crashing. Worst stock market in 75 years. I'm like, I got to talk to somebody. And for marriage, I converted to Catholicism. My wife's devout Catholic. And I'm like, you know what? I should go to St. Patrick's and confess everything. I just did it to the FBI. I should talk to a priest. So after lunch, I walked to St. Patrick's. The line is long. I'm like, do I know some of these guys? Are these guys in the hedge fund industry? And so I get to the confession. I tell him everything. He's probably like, all right, get to whatever. And I'm like, by the way, this morning, FBI approached me about insider trading. I did it. I just threw it in there. He's like, what? And he's like, the FBI approached me. They said I can help him out. And he's like, Tom, it sounds like your whole life you played by the rules. 1% of the time you didn't. If the FBI has given you a chance to clean up the industry, you should do it. Now I should have talked to an attorney. But the priest, I don't know if I was suicidal, but it was my lowest point.
Right.
And the priest sort of planted the seed. And the way I think about it, my penance was like to help the FBI. But then I had to tell my wife too, and I waited till Friday. I went to work before she woke up. I got home after she went to bed. I didn't want to see her, and I didn't want to have to tell her.
Yeah.
So Friday after work, young couple in Manhattan. How was your week? And I'm like, before you tell me the latest Lehman Brothers story, I have to tell you something that happened this week. It's pretty major. And so I'm usually like, fun making jokes, and she's like, all right. I'm like, you have to sit down. And I think she was probably thinking, oh, he's going to leave me or something. And so I said, Tuesday morning, the FBI was in my face about this insider trading I did. And she was like, she paused forever. Can you say that again? It's not what I was expecting. I said it again. She pauses again. She's like, well, you didn't do anything to hurt me. If the FBI has given you a chance to clean up the industry, which you always told me was corrupt, you should do it. Now, you know that in our situation, like 85% of marriages end, like in this situation. And so she stayed with me, which at this point, so she's telling me I should do it. So I called the FBI
Well, so I was going to say first two things. Sorry, real quick. One, it's funny because I was talking to my wife about this. And for example, I went to Vegas and talked to a guy, spent a couple hours with a guy in Vegas a few months ago who was actually about to be sentenced for white collar, and he was going to go to prison. And of course, he's, concerned about his wife, his kids, the whole thing. And I was talking to my wife, and I was saying that the only people that I knew that where their wives stayed with them were guys that were very well off and could maintain their wife's position, right?
Okay.
And so if they went to prison for 5 years, the wife stayed with them. They got a couple kids. They own their house. They still are worth $12 million. He can continue to she can maintain her lifestyle for the next few years.
Right.
They stay. Or women that are like from another country. They're they're citizens, but they're South American. They were born where you get married, you stay together no matter what.
Right.
And other than that, I know, and I'm sure I probably know of one or two that are out there, but almost none of the wives stay more than a few years, like they didn't sign up for this.
No,
like,
exactly.
you know what I'm saying? Like,
Exactly.
I got 2 kids I'm raising, or I got a kid I'm raising. I didn't sign up for this. I'm being patted down by a guard every 2 weeks to come see you, and I have to wait an hour and a half. So, and then when I heard that statistic, the 85%, I would remember saying, I was like, oh, that's absolutely. And the 15%, I'm sure those are people that still have money, or they're, because, and so the fact that your wife, because I listened to the whole thing, the story you had told on the podcast. What was the guy's podcast?
Jordan Harbinger.
Jordan Hardin.
Yeah.
Harbinger.
Yeah.
He sounds super familiar. Yeah, that's a great statistic. Like it's so true, because it's horrific.
And she had every right to leave. I mean, at that point, we just got married with no kids.
And I'm not the guy, like, you're not the person. Like, I get it. It does seem, in some ways it's unfair, but it's like, wait a second, you represented a guy, you're clearly not the person that I thought you were.
I trusted you.
Right. I trusted you. You're doing this thing, you're jeopardizing our marriage, our life together, our future.
Yeah.
So I can see that. Like, I don't. That was one thing I wanted to mention. The other thing is you mentioning the FBI. The other thing is funny. It's funny that, of course, the priest, you, and your wife. The problem is all of you, with the exception of the insider trading thing, are law-abiding citizens who've watched too much Law and Order, and they think that the authorities are always going to work in their best interest.
Right.
And cooperating is the right thing to do. And I'm not saying cooperating is not the right thing to do. Sometimes sometimes it's not, but for the most part, most of the time it is.
Yeah.
But without a lawyer, you don't get the best deal.
Right.
And you can get a deal where, like, I know people that cooperated, and it's like, I know guys that went out and got a lawyer. It's like, you ran a Ponzi scheme. I know a guy who ran a Ponzi scheme, lost $1 million, stole from his friends and family, lost $1 million. I mean, a clear Ponzi scheme, didn't invest any of it. Mm-hmm. Doesn't get indicted. Basically, all these people get together. They contact the FBI. FBI contacts the U.S. attorney. FBI comes out and talks to the guy. The guy hires an attorney, probably with the stolen money, and goes in and talks to absolutely 100% clear. And this went on, by the way, for a year. Like, he's lying. He's making fake bank statements, fake investment accounts. He's faking everything on a Forex scam where he's saying he's investing money into Forex, which he wasn't. And he goes in, he talks to the U.S. attorney. His attorney goes in, talks to the U.S. attorney with him, and he never gets indicted. They do what's called a pretrial intervention. Mm-hmm. You pay back the money. We're going to put you on probation for like 4 years. And in the process of this, it's kind of like probation. They never indict him. Mm-hmm. He never gets a felony, anything. He just has to pay back the $1 million that they say he owes. And you know how he did that? He started another Ponzi scheme. And used that money to pay this back, and never gets indicted for that. So there are multiple accounts where I know of guys that cooperated, and with a good attorney, they went in and they said, look, this is what's happening. Yeah. He's a good guy. He made a mistake. Let's let him cooperate against the people that are bad guys, and let's keep him from being indicted. Yeah. And they've done that, and then they never get indicted. In my case, when I first got arrested, I went to my attorney. He was like, you haven't been indicted yet. if you go and turn over like 5 of your brokers, and this is my first case, by the way, because I've had a couple cases.
Right.
The second case, I cooperated.
Right.
Because I realized then that's just stupid.
Yeah.
Well, the first case, my lawyer said, go get like 10 files, 10 of the most egregious, fraudulent files you have, to 5 or 6 of your brokers, bring them in, cooperate with the FBI, we'll get them indicted, and I can keep you from being indicted at all.
Yeah.
And of course I said, I'm not going to do that. I thought I was a fucking gangster.
Right.
And I didn't do it. You know, in retrospect, I should have, because they all cooperated against me, and I didn't realize that that's really just the smartest thing to do. Is just immediately, in a lot of cases, if you could realize people are getting busted around you, the smartest thing is to go to the FBI first, because I know what's coming down my way.
Right.
Let me come in, work out a deal with an attorney.
Yeah.
I'll cooperate. I don't need to be indicted.
Right.
That happens. But, you know, your family, the priest, everybody's like, no, cooperate. You don't need a lawyer.
Yeah.
Do the right thing. They'll look out for you. And the truth is, they're just not always looking out for you.
No, that's right. And I don't know, we can't ever play it back like the what if I would have said, okay, I'll help you out, but we have to make a pros deal or something like that.
Right.
It's hard to play that back. We don't know.
Well, you don't know. But I know, but you don't know in general. You're just a normal person like
Right.
I just want to fix what I did, and you think it'll be okay. And I mean, ultimately it is, but you're just honestly mostly because you're just a smart guy. You're gonna figure out a way to make the best out of a bad situation. So
right. So I told her, and she took it as well as she could. And the FBI, I think they had even been following me and profiled me. Like this guy will probably flip. Like they even told me later, like you go home straight to your wife. You don't have anything on the side. I'm like, no, I'm a faithful.
Right.
And they're like, oh, that's sort of more upstanding than like the average Wall Street guy. I'm like, okay, so let's go to her. She's like, I think you should do it. And so Monday I called the FBI. I didn't talk to an attorney still. I said, I know what's going on. I'm like, but how do I help? Like, you know, I think the woman wore a wire on me. I'm pretty sure I had that weird conversation with a friend. Like, who do I even help? They're like, let's have lunch. Like, who do you think are the worst actors? So it's very rare for an informant to have sort of this open playing field. Like, how can you help us out? Like, I'm like, well, here are the worst actors. Here's a list of them. But this is a guy I don't even know. I know somebody that works for him, and he lives in Silicon Valley. This is his business model. So like, here are the 5 or 8 worst business model guys who are doing this. And the FBI doesn't say, do you know this guy? They'll just sort of give you like, okay, but can you help us? I guess what I could do, so it's sort of like, how am I going to get meetings? It's 2008, so maybe we could say, hey, I'm out in California at this conference. Could I talk to the guy I know that works for the guy that they want and get like a meeting at Starbucks just to say, hey, I'm probably going to get fired, not having a good year. You could get a free pass in 2008 if you weren't doing well. Nobody was.
Right.
And so I'm looking around. And by the way, I had these 4 stocks last year. I'm going to have more information coming. How do you do it? And so it's kind of a clumsy way to be sitting with somebody at Starbucks. The wire that I wore, so people know, was like an inch or 2 big. It fit in my front dress shirt pocket. So if it fell out, we still had BlackBerries then. The FBI said, like, just tell them that you're extra with BlackBerry battery. Like, oh, yeah, that sounds like great. That sounds like it'll work. Exactly. So I go out. And they're like, okay, this guy in Silicon Valley, like I could tell they want him. And so the FBI agent, the female, flies out with me to California. She's like, all right, 3:00, tell him you're going to meet him at this Starbucks next to the conference. I go in, I'm there first. I see the 2 FBI agents at another table. They're not making eye contact. And I think they just want to make sure that I'm not sliding a piece of paper over saying like, I'm wearing a wire, don't say anything. And so.
Yeah, that's the Jordan Belfort. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
No, yeah.
Yeah, Belfort, when he wore a wire. I don't think they don't have this in the movie.
They do.
Oh, do they?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. So he's wearing a wire against his buddy, and he slips him a note.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Saying like I'm wired or something. Don't. And so then the guy has this benign conversation where he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, Jordan.
Okay. Yeah.
But then later, they go to Jordan. When they go to arrest him, they show him the note. The guy immediately went, got a lawyer, cooperated, and gave him the note. So he's like,
okay, yeah.
They're like, oh, we don't trust you anymore.
Yeah. So the FBI's there. So this hedge fund big shot guy sits down with me. He's 20 years older than me. I'm looking for a job. And I'm like, hey, I'm looking around. And I kind of had to suspect that he was insider trading also, because it's not something, a topic you would bring up if the guy is clean. And so I said, I had these 4 stocks last year. I knew about Kronos, and he had been in Kronos too. He's like, oh, you know Kronos? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, I have some more sources probably this year coming with more information. But like, how do you do it? How do you build your sources? And the guy just looked at me like, I thought, oh my God, he knows, like he must see this thing is huge on my chest. He doesn't say anything. I felt the silence. I'm like, oh, did you watch that Niners game last weekend? Terrible. We never got back to it. The FBI at the time was not listening contemporaneously. Like they would listen to it later. So he leaves and they told me to wait 10 minutes and then walk over and give it to them in Starbucks. I give it to them. I don't say anything. We're going to meet back in New York 2 days later. So I met with the FBI several times outside my office in the Blacktown car, which I always thought was weird.
Right.
Like, what if somebody sees me getting into a Blacktown car? Like,
Right.
Like, this is just,
Suspicious.
movies. Yeah, it's suspicious. I get in there like, Tom, we listened to it. I'm in the back seat. They're in the front seat. We listened to it. You're terrible. Like, you changed the subject. And again, I felt like I could push back, like stick up for myself. I'm like, hey, it's my first time doing this, guys.
Right.
Did you know there was no training? They're like, all right. The woman's like, all right, slow down. Like, okay. The guy's pissed. Like, if you're not good at this, Tom, we can just arrest you. You're like, all right. So give me another chance. There's no training at the Wharton School of Business on wearing a wire. Maybe there should be.
Right.
so I'm like, all right, let's try it again. Let's have a phone call with this guy. Because I left it at that, at least let's have a follow-up phone call. I had a follow-up phone call and talk a little bit more. And the guy on the phone call says, okay, you were asking me about Cisco systems. I actually have a relative there in finance that gives me information because I was telling him about all my sources. I'm like, oh. And then the conversation, they listen to it. They're like,
Yeah, that's massive, right? Like,
they're like, and what you're going to do here, Tom, is you're going to stop talking to this guy. We're going to take care of it. So this sort of situation happened all of 2008, 2009, where it was these meetings with people of interest. I'm the young guy interviewing for a job. And by the way, how do you insider trade? And so I got comfortable with that silence, which I'd ask the question. They might pause for a minute and I'm just drinking my coffee. And eventually they would say something like that or, all right, this is how I do it. Because Tom's telling me about his sources. I'll give him a little nugget.
Right.
And I'm sort of leaning in like this. Okay,
Right.
it's good. And the FBI was like, wow, this is like, it's really good.
And then you part ways and don't really talk to that person again. But
Yeah.
But that most likely they are then able to transcribe that, go to a judge. We
Yeah.
want to get a wiretap on this guy for the
this
next
guy.
6 months.
Right.
And then they just listen to his phone calls. And of course, he's actively talking to people on the phone.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly. At
whatever.
that point, they can build the cases.
And then they build an entire case.
Right.
That one, because they have to have a reason
Yeah.
to get you can't just go to a judge
Yeah,
and say,
you have to have a reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's a major invasion of privacy. So, and what the young prosecutor did, she had come from organized crime and went to securities fraud, white collar crime, and said, actually, to build these cases, we need people wired up, like we used organized crime. So that's how wearing the wires kind of started with these cases. And so I'm doing this. There's one guy really high up the FBI's list who lived in Greenwich, Connecticut, a suburb of New York.
Right.
I got him 15 conversations. He was always on to me. He's like, not talking about this. And then one Sunday afternoon, and he's like one of the worst guys too. I suspect like his business model for 10 years was just 4 stocks every quarter, the long and the short. He calls me on a Sunday and he's like, we need to have dinner tonight. I'm like, okay, I'll be up there. And I called the FBI. They're like, oh my God, he's going to talk tonight. They met me at Grand Central train station in Manhattan, gave me the wire. I took the train up to Greenwich. This guy picked me up at the Greenwich train station. He says, Tom, good to see you. I brought swim trunks for you. We're going swimming at my mother's house. Now, I think he's on to me at that
Right.
point. And The Sopranos is popular that summer, so that's why I know about going swimming with the fishes. And so I'm like, okay. I actually still played it cool. I'm like, let's go swimming. I'm kind of used to it. It's in my front pocket. But I'm like, how am I going to get out of this?
And it's
then
not like the FBI is
Isn't
in a
it-
van
No,
and
exactly.
says, okay, let's go get him. Like, go grab him, pull him out. We're not going to let him do this.
So they're putting me in a situation here.
Or is the FBI following you?
So
or they,
years later, I didn't know. My first speaking engagement at the FBI, which we could talk about, like they're like, oh yeah, we thought that was weird. We took the Blacktown car across the street. Okay, so
they were there,
They were there.
but
I
they
didn't
were
know
at a
that.
distance. But they don't know that he's saying we're going swimming.
exactly, because they're not listening to it real time. So we drive to this old mansion in Greenwich. He starts disrobing in this room. I'm like, all right, bro, I'm going to go get changed. Like, you get changed in here, I'm going to get changed in the bathroom. So he at least let me do that. I take it out, I put it in my shorts, and I put these swim trunks on. I put my shorts on the bed in the guest room, so he could have had somebody go
Right.
through there. I guess nobody else is home. So we're walking out to this pool. It's so quiet. I see like a shovel against the house, a hole in the ground. Like, holy shit.
You
And I
don't
see
ever
some-
ask him, like, why are we going swimming? Like, this is what's happening.
Yeah,
like,
I'm like following him, and I see he has plants there, so he's having some landscaping. So I get in the swimming pool.
you didn't ask?
I didn't ask, and so he grabs a tennis ball. We're playing this awkward game of catch, and he's pouring it on. I'm like, at this point, I want to get out of there.
Yeah.
So then I said, we're playing tennis. I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we swimming? He's like, all right, Tom, I've been acting kind of weird for a while, which I had. And he's like, Tom, he had spoken to an attorney. The attorney said, all right, this guy's wearing a wire. you have to ask him one question, and he has to answer him truthfully. And so I was going to give him my cover.
What attorney told him that?
Yeah,
Was this,
I have to answer
was
truthfully.
it a tax attorney?
Exactly. So I'm like,
You got me.
I'm like, what is your question? So I was like, but I'm going to tell him exactly. I just want to go home. I want to just confess to him, yeah, this is me. And he's like, all right, Tom, the big question was, have you been approached by the SEC, who's the regulator?
Right.
And truthfully, I could say, and I'm giving him a hint. I'm like, not the SEC.
Right.
And he's like, all right, I just had to make sure you weren't wearing a wire. I'm sorry, that was awkward. Here's how I did all this insider trading, all the implicating statements. It's not recorded. And we get out, and I go back home. And it's obviously not, it's not recorded. He is actually, years later, he's never charged by the FBI. Up until a few years ago, he was actually still managing money for pensions and endowments. Like, he was one of the worst actors. It was never charged. And so it is what it is.
But really, the kind of guy you want managing your shit. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
Like, there's all these people out here who are like, that's horrible.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
honestly, he's the guy I want managing my pension fund.
Yeah,
He's
exactly.
a winner.
Right.
No.
And it's just a how-to for insider trading. Don't go to a swimming pool to do it. But it's sort of like, so he's never charged. So that's like the craziest moment I think I had in terms of.
They didn't ever tell you, like, go back? Like, can we go back and let's call him on the phone or get nothing like that?
I told them what happened. They're like, so we're apologizing. So sorry you were in that situation. And we didn't follow up with that guy. And so,
Right.
I guess the AOSA didn't pursue that case or whatever. And then eventually, so 2 months after that, late 2009, middle of the crisis, 20 guys are in handcuffs on CNBC. So the first arrest happened. Rajaratnam had
Do you know this is coming?
No. So he had booked a flight to London, a return flight through Switzerland, not extradition. The FBI saw that. And I think Raj is pretty sure guys were onto him at this point in 2009. And so the FBI, I think, arrested him a month before they had planned to in October of 2009. And then 20 guys are arrested. I recognize some of the names. And this is a big day, like in the Wall Street Journal. It's like those tipping charts with the names. And in the middle was Tipper X. And I'm trying to figure out who's Tipper X. And actually, they didn't tell me I was Tipper X.
Right.
I forgot to mention, too, so at the same time in my life, that week those guys were arrested, my wife is in the hospital giving birth to our first daughter. They told me to turn on CNBC. So they told me when I'm in there, I turn it on. All these guys are in handcuffs. I see Tipper X. I see it in the Wall Street Journal. I go out, get the newspaper that day, and it says Tipper X. And I'm looking for my name. And I'm like, oh, shit, I think I'm Tipper X. And I call them. They're like, yeah, that's you. And they're like, you should probably talk to an attorney now. So, and everybody's like, who is Tipper X? CNBC's has the story. Who is Tipper X? They mentioned all these well-known people. I'm sure we're very upset to be mentioned with this. At this point, I'm like 30, still working in this capacity with the FBI. But my cooperation, I think, is starting to come to a close. I'm doing this less and less. And so I talked to an attorney. All I know about insider trading at that point is Martha Stewart. That's the only big, and that was obstruction of justice, not insider trading, where she sold the stock. And so I call him. He's like, oh, you're not going to trial. I don't want your case. So gave me a referral. And I talked to this attorney. He's like, wait. You've been doing this almost 2 years.
Wait, you talked to Martha Stewart's attorney
first. And he's like, oh, you're not going to go to trial. I'll give you a referral you're going to plead guilty. You cooperated.
Okay.
I'll give you a referral because it's not going to be a big case.
Right.
Big money case.
Not enough money in it.
Yeah,
for
exactly.
him.
For the
Big
trial.
shot.
Right. So he's like, you're pleading guilty. It's an easy one. Right. So he gives me a referral to a friend. I call who would become my attorney. I'm like, did you see this stuff with Tipper X? He's like, yeah. I'm like, that's me. And he's like, well, who's like, well, you calling me now? I needed the case from your other attorney. I'm like, no, there was no other attorney. You're the first attorney I've spoken to. And he was shocked. He was like, Tom, did you know the first day you're supposed to hire me when the FBI approaches you? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, this is a recurring theme. Hey, it's my first time doing this.
Right.
Pretty straightforward.
Next time.
So next time I'll do this. So he's like, we have to proffer with the assistant U.S. attorney. The proffer is you have to talk about all the bad stuff, the cooperation, all that. And so I'm proffering with the U.S. attorney, and they're like, tell us about all the times in your life that you've broken the law. And I was like, when I was 17, I was speeding in college at the Napster. They're like, not that, like stuff. Right. I smoked a joint in college. Okay, but I think they must feel bad. They're like, it's a clean guy, other than the 4 trades, like
right.
So, proffer with the U.S. attorney, and then I eventually plead guilty. So 2009, late 2009, I plead guilty, and I forgot to say, like the FBI. They're like, you're doing such a great job for your country. This is the way they were framing it. And I'm patriotic, and I'm thinking I'm just trying to stay positive. So I'm like, maybe, what's going to happen? They're probably going to drop the charges. And maybe they're going to have me like the Frank Avondale. Maybe I'll go back to the FBI every year and help them out. And so I'm trying to just stay positive. And it's all a joke. They're not going to.
Yeah.
You can't be a professional cooperator with the FBI. Once they're done with you, you're done. And so I go into the courtroom and see the indictment for the first time. And the judge says, how do you plead United States of America versus Thomas Hardin? And at first I'm like, wait, I was doing this for no, I'm not. This is all. And then the young prosecutor, which I think for financial crimes, are like, are the victims present? Where are the victims? And he says, there's no victims. So
Right.
I'm like, oh, and that's the rationalization. So my attorney said there's these things called the federal sentencing guidelines for financial crimes. They're looking at the 1.2 million your firm made. And so the guideline was 30 to 36 months. He said, now you've cooperated a lot. You wore a wire 48 times, which he couldn't believe. He's like, I can't believe you did this much cooperation without an attorney. I've never seen that. But the judge you got, you can look at the judges. Are they more pro prosecution or more pro defense? She was pretty strict. And at this time, Occupy Wall Street was going on. Let's hang these guys for the financial crisis, which the financial crisis was not insider trading. That was the mortgage-backed securities, which we talked about. So, but anybody going to trial was like, oh, the fact pattern didn't matter. You're a Wall Street guy. We hate you. And so she was pretty tough on people. So we thought I might get a few months or whatever. And so eventually they asked me to cooperate on 2 friends that I had tipped on the Kronos deal. I said, I'm drawing the line there. And they're like, oh, that's risky, Tom. And they're like, we're done with you. Tomorrow your name's coming out. So the New York Times ran the story, Tipper X is Tom Hardin. The Wall Street Journal made it a front page paper, a story. I forgot to mention I had left my firm a few months before. I thought it might happen any day, so I didn't want to be working there. So I knew it would be a bad day for me and for my wife, obviously, same last name.
So they released your name
Tipper X is Tom Hardin, because I drew the line at 2 friends that they wanted me to cooperate on.
Okay.
I felt I had done enough at that point. The way I rationalized the cooperation was like, I'm getting you the worst of the worst.
Right.
Hopefully I can save these 2 guys.
I was going to say, but even saying that, those guys probably just took pleas anyway. Like if you had said, yeah, what if you just said, yeah, I'll cooperate against everybody, those guys were going to take pleas anyway. They wouldn't have even known. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But I mean, I get your trying to...
And those 2 guys actually were never charged. They actually ended up having very successful businesses, multimillionaires. So I think they know, but for the grace of God, I'm in this situation and they're not. So
and I'm sure they're still buddies and they send you cards and call you all the time.
So one guy actually had me come talk to his company.
Oh, really?
And he's like, you're not going to... I'm like, I'm not going to mention your name. But he's like, when Tom Hardin's Tipper X in the newspaper, he's like, I'm looking over my shoulder every day.
Oh, yeah.
I'm talking to an attorney. And somehow they had so much on their plate, like the 85 guys were arrested, they just didn't get to the ones that were a little bit off. And so the other guy cut ties with me, will never talk to me again. So that day, I lost like the 40 Facebook friends, half my LinkedIn connections. But then 4 guys from college were like, hey, man, I saw this. If you ever need to get coffee, you probably know, like you figure out who your true friends are.
Oh, yeah. Listen, to me, it's great.
Yeah.
It's like, now I know. You know what I'm saying? Like the same guys that are calling you and your buddy and your good friends and the moment the chips are down and they drop you, like a hot potato, you realize, oh, we were never friends.
Yeah, exactly.
We were never, not what I consider a friend.
Yeah.
And I used to always see that saying where it was like, they would say, like, if you have 3 friends, 3 people in your life that you can say were true friends, you should count yourself lucky.
That's right.
And I remember thinking, I got lots of friends, but I really didn't have lots of friends.
No, that's right. So you figure out, in this situation, you figure out who your true friends are. And so 4 buddies emailed me. And then that day, so my wife was still working. She had left Lehman. Luckily, she was fired 6 months before the bankruptcy, so we could get out of the stock at like 30 before it went to 0. So that was actually good. So we had a little bit of money. And so she's working. And now I'm a stay-at-home dad. Tipper X is the front page story. It's a 24-hour news story, but it feels like it's going to be forever. The phone's ringing. These reporters are knocking on the door at my house. One of the lowest moments I felt, she got home from work. She's crying. She stayed with me at this point, holding my daughter in the corner. She's crying. She's like, I can't believe you did this to us. And if you want to feel lower than that, it's pretty hard. I mean, it's all my own decisions, and I put us in this situation, my family, and like, wow. And she was so stoic up to this point, like, you're going to get us out of this. You're going to figure it out. And she just had a breaking point, understandably, at that point. Like, reporters are calling. So it was tough. I had to tell my parents, at that point, they're going to come up to visit their first granddaughter or my first daughter. That was tough. You feel like everybody trusted you up to this point, and then they had no idea this was going on for a while because I wasn't allowed to tell them. And so you start to, again, just figure out, I let a lot of people down. Like, people trusted me that I wouldn't engage in something like this. And then I wasn't sentenced, so that was 2010. I wasn't sentenced until 2015. We kept getting a holding date for the sentencing. The pre-sentencing report was good. Like the 5K letter from the FBI was actually, it's like, here's all the bad stuff, but here's the good stuff, which is a lot longer than the bad stuff. So that looked good.
So they prepare a pre-sentence report,
Right.
which is prepared by a probation officer, which you're assigned as soon as you get in trouble or plead. I guess as soon as you kind of plead guilty, they assign a probation officer. He prepares a pre-sentence report or investigation report, whatever, PSR, and which is handed. They calculate the sentencing guidelines and they give it to the judge.
Yeah.
And you have an opportunity, obviously, to argue. Your lawyer has an opportunity to argue because sometimes that pre-sentence report will say 10 years and then they'll give you a bunch of enhancements to get it to 10 years. And then your lawyer can argue, like, what are you talking about? Like, these don't apply.
Yeah.
You can't give him those enhancements. And maybe you can negotiate, get it down to 7 or 8, whatever it is.
Right.
But, so the pre-sentence report, they give it to the judge. What did it say? You're saying
so that they were recommending no prison just because I had helped them out so much.
Right.
And the FBI writes what's called the 5K letter for the cooperator.
Right.
So that was being written, but we kept getting the sentencing date pushed out. And I'm just applying for jobs to be like a back office finance guy at any company because I was a really good finance guy or Excel guy. And even when I had leads on jobs, neighbors were helping me out. They're like, you're a good guy. I'll vouch for you. HR would always come and be like, look, we can't hire this guy. He hasn't been sentenced yet. Like, we don't want to take the PR of like hiring tipper X at our company.
So you're not lying to them.
No, I was like, I'm going to answer that question truthfully. Yes, I have a felony, but I'm tipper X.
I would have lied.
Yeah, exactly.
I would have lied.
Yeah. So I filled the whole thing out, and then there's no callbacks once you do that. Yeah. And so I started. The one business I started was like the drop shipping business with Amazon. So I bought items off of Alibaba, the Chinese supplier, and would list them for 10 times higher on Amazon placemats. I'm scaling that up. My Alibaba supplier in China starts hijacking my Amazon listing to get the buy box. That's not working. I'm just trying to figure out, as you know, just one-person businesses that make money. But I also was a stay-at-home dad, and one day I'm carrying my daughter up the stairs. I was actually like well over 200 pounds at that point too.
What do you weigh now?
So now I'm 165.
Okay. But
I got down to, so I was like 215. And so I was carrying her up the stairs, and I thought I was like having a heart attack, shortness of breath. I go to the doctor. I'm 32. Hadn't been to the doctor since college. Typical guy. Everything I thought was fine. And they're like, "Oh, you're 215." I'm like, "Oh, I thought it was 175." So he's like,
"You didn't notice your pants weren't fitting anymore."
Exactly. And so he's like, "The blood work came back, and it's terrible. And what the hell is going on?" Of course, I'm like, "Doc." Probably the first time I told the story was this doctor. He's like, "Dude, cancel the rest of my day. This is an amazing story." But he's like, "Look, obviously this is wearing on you, and you're technically obese actually at that way in the BMI." He's like, "You're gonna have to do something to at least tackle your health. I know you can't work right now, or you think you can't get a job, but you're gonna have to do something." So I told my wife, she's like, "I'm signing you up for a 5K." And I played soccer when I was, so maybe I had some endurance. And she's like, "I'm going to beat you pushing the baby in the jogging stroller." She was athletic. And so she signs me up for this 5K. She does beat me, but it lights a fire. I'm like, I'm actually a pretty good runner. 5Ks, the half marathons, the marathons, run like a sub 3 hour marathon, which is good for an amateur. I start running ultra marathons. What I'm doing here is I'm running twice a day. I'm doing like Olympic training plans over 100 miles a week. I'm not actually dealing with what I have to deal with my professional future. I'm just putting that energy into what I can do right now. When she needs to have a very important conversation about my future, I'm just fueling it all into endurance sports. So I have like this addiction now to endurance sports, these ultra marathons. And so I signed up for this 100-mile race in New Jersey around a 1-mile loop. And it's supposed to take about 24 hours. And the veterans are like, what you do is like run 7 minutes and walk 3 minutes because your quads are going to get destroyed. I'm like, I'm in great shape. I was down to 145 pounds at that point, no weight. And I'm like mile 31 lapping people. They're like, dude, it's not going to go well. It's a 100-mile race.
Right.
So mile 78, I can't run anymore. Everything's breaking down. I think I had rhabdo. I'm peeing blood. I'm like, that's not good. I feel like shit. 78 miles. I'm like, I'm done. It's my first time. It's fine. And I have an air mattress in my car there. Every mile you pass your car, so the temptation is just to stop. I'm like, I'm done. I pop the trunk, go to crawl on this air mattress, and I see a note there on the pillow, and it's a note from my wife. It says, "We didn't sleep on you. You can't sleep on us." So I turn around, hobble the rest of the way, and I got to 100 miles in like second place for the race. So it was the only feeling of like accomplishment, during this time. I still had to be sentenced, but I'm like, again, this sort of theme of like, she's probably not leaving me in this situation, but I got to figure my shit out. Finally sentenced, the judge, like, you helped build 20 of these 80 cases. It says your PSR. I see it's been 7 years. You're just going to get what's called the time served sentence. So the one time I was at the U.S. Marshal's office before I pled guilty, just that couple hours of being processed.
Right.
So go on with your life. And there's an attorney there, a reporter there from the AP who was like, wow, you became like this vegan ultra marathon guy. Like, let me write this story. You turned your life around. And then...
Were you given any probation?
No probation either.
Okay.
Just the time served, which was just the U.S. Marshal's office, but still the securities fraud conviction. So this AP reporter writes this nice article about me, and the producer of the first podcast I was ever on, the Rich Roll podcast, reached out in 2015. So the first time I ever shared the story was in 2015 on the Rich Roll podcast, and the boss of the 2 FBI agents I was working with, who I had not met, was listening to that episode. And in 2016, I get this phone call, and I see it's that unrestricted number that I remember that when your phone rings and it doesn't say it's the FBI, it's restricted or whatever. And I remember 2016 thinking, holy shit, this cannot be them. Like, I have already been sentenced. And my wife was probably thinking, what did you do now?
Right.
So I answer, hello. Hey, Tom, it's Agent so-and-so at the FBI. I just heard your whole story on Rich Roll. It's great. How you doing? I'm like, actually, not that well. Still struggling to find work. Just this Alibaba, Amazon stuff that doesn't seem to be able to be scalable. And I just found out, too, I forgot to mention that I couldn't coach my daughters in soccer because I had to check the box. And the commissioner said, we have insurance with the league, and it doesn't matter if it's nonviolent, like we can't have felons. So how do you tell that to a 5-year-old?
Yeah.
So I was feeling bad. It was just, again, it's all my decisions, but like, it's just, I was in a low moment there, too, when he called.
It just starts affecting every single aspect of your life.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I can't coach her. She's shy. She only will play if I can be the coach, and I can't. And he's like, oh, sorry to hear that. And I wanted to say, like, oh, by the way, your guys told me not to talk to an attorney. I didn't say that at first.
Right.
And he's like, back in the day, Tom, of the 85 people, we just thought your case was interesting. Like, you were the youngest guy we charged, and that 46,000 was like one of the lowest. And I thought he was rubbing it in. I'm like, oh, I'm trying not to get caught.
Right.
Thanks. What? Anything else? So he's like, no. He's like, could you just come talk to our rookie agents? This is happening again on Wall Street, 8 years later. I'm like, why are guys doing this again? Like, he's like, it's human behavior. People rationalize. So I go, all right, I'll come speak to the rookie agents. I have nothing to lose. I'm like, here's how it happened. Here's what you guys said. Oh, sorry about that. So, but here's also, like, if you approach guys like me, they're an asset to you. You can't tell them don't talk to an attorney. This is what I would do. Like, they can do what they do. So I told the story to the FBI, and a couple of agents are there. Tom, you should go out and try to start a second career telling this story for what's called compliance training in the industry and financial services. Like,
right.
Every regulated industry has compliance training. It's usually very dry, not memorable. Here's the latest rules and regs. Don't do it. All right, go back to your
right. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, or you watch these stupid videos, like, don't do this sexual harassment. It's like very obvious in the videos what not to do, right? So I'm like, okay. But I'm like, who wants to hear this? They're like, no, I think a lot of people, this would help a lot of young professionals. And so I'm an introverted guy. Like, I'm not used to talking to crowds, especially about something so personal and vulnerable. But I'm like, all right, let me give this a shot. I emailed maybe 500 cold emails to anybody with the chief compliance officer title on LinkedIn. I saw all 500 of many hundred went through. 2 people responded. One guy thought it was a cybersecurity attack because they're like, what's Tipper X? It doesn't sound, you're not him. Like, that doesn't even, and I'm like, no, this is not that. One guy's like, hey, come talk to my traders. I just listened to this episode you did. That's pretty cool. And he's like, I'm not going to pay you, whatever, but come talk. And he's like, that's the best training. He's like, I've been doing this 30 years. That's the best training I've ever seen. And
then
so
cut me a check.
Yeah, exactly. So after that, I said, can you refer me to somebody at a big fund? And I just started getting my reps in, sharing this story at like local libraries, local, Kiwanis clubs or that type of thing.
That's horrible.
I remember one library, it was like 4 85-year-olds. They're just like, oh my God. It's just like all who showed up, and I'm like pouring it out, the swimming pool story. They're just like, I think there's something here, Tom. And so eventually I look it up, and we started, I don't know if, I'm like, who does this? There's this guy, Walt.
Yeah.
Walt's sharing his story. And I called Walt. He's like, oh, yeah, I know about all your case. Tip for X. Okay, how much should I charge Walt? And he told me what he does. And so I just started quoting people. And in 2017, I had like 90 speaking engagements like in 5 countries. And there was no booking agent. It was all referrals to me, cold emails coming in. And so since 2017 to now, this has been like a full-time gig, it's like 580 presentations in 13 countries. I mean, I'm not a well-known person or anything. It's just it's not the easiest thing to do. I would say, imagine every week going to a company and saying, hey, here's the worst thing I ever did. You can feel the judgment at first when you walk in.
Oh, yeah.
Why is this guy monetizing his crime, which we might get, but it's not that. And then, I forgot to mention, when I spoke at the FBI, I'm like, who does this? They're like, Frank Abagnale. They gave me Frank's number. He never called me back, thank God, because he'd tell me to make up everything, right?
Yeah, I was gonna say
he's talked to Javier. So didn't talk to Frank. He never called me back. So I just started doing this at the conferences, and really what I do today is this compliance training, financial services, but any regulated industry, like medical technology, where there's risk of bribing doctors or that type of thing, where you talk about, it's called the slippery slope, how it starts, and apply it to that industry. And it's sort of, I view this as like my act of, I think it's some kind of therapy for me, like just talking in front of crowds. They're very much like, why did we bring this in? And you see their body language change during it. And they come up and they're like, I kind of see how it all happened. Your boss is looking the other way. And at my company, I could see something like that, maybe not to that degree of a cash payoff or something, but might be my situation here where I can make that wrong decision. And I don't know if you found this in speaking engagements, but people come up and confess, not maybe crimes, but like the worst thing they ever did. I was speaking in London a few months ago, and a woman confessed to me like a 20-year affair she was having with a married man. I want to say, I just bought these 4 stocks. But people, I think the vulnerability has people open up. And I'm like, oh, wow, there's something here. And so, yeah, that's what I've been doing the last 7 years, just sharing the story. And then anytime a young employee, like a 25-year-old, maybe type A trader who thinks he knows everything, stops me after this and is like, I'll never forget this. You know, I can see how this happened. I'm like, man, if I was you in 25 and heard this, maybe it's not my story.
Right.
So that's the idea. And two things with this, I was going through a lot of shame and guilt when I started. The first conference I spoke at, the event planner was like, that was very dark. Like I was beating myself up. I'm a piece of shit. And she's like, you shouldn't have the shame. Like the shame is I'm a piece of shit and I did a bad thing. The guilt is I'm not a piece of shit, but I did a bad thing. She's like, that guilt will actually keep this going.
Yeah.
But I'm like, shame and guilt, the same thing. And she's like, it's not the same thing. And I'm like, wow, that was actually a powerful insight. And then also today, you might have this too, like guys in a situation have been through something, they're getting their life back together. They'll reach out to me because they want to see how can they speak. And I want to pay it forward to other people with other stories, as we talked about before. But too often people are like, I made a mistake. Oh, what's your mistake? I embezzled $10 million. Was that a mistake or was that a bad decision? And we make both, but if we call our bad decisions mistakes, we're not really owning those bad decisions.
That's a whole bunch of that. That wasn't one I hit the wrong button.
Yeah, I didn't fall to the keyboard.
Oops, yeah, it wasn't. I didn't accidentally do this. Yeah.
So I would think for anybody listening, maybe in our situation or something like that, you have to say those were bad decisions, not mistakes. And you'll start to have a sixth sense of this when you hear people say mistake. You're like, no, that was bad decisions. So
people don't want to, like we talked about earlier, like they don't want to own up to. They don't, they want to rationalize it. They don't want to own up to saying, or the whole. And I think the same thing with that woman speaking with you is the whole. As far as keeping it going, like I don't get up there and apologize the whole time. No. Like, nobody wants to hear that. Like, maybe 3 people in a 500 might want to hear, or they get offended, but they're gonna pick something to be offended anyway.
Exactly.
So it's funny whenever I start my speeches, I typically say, listen, I'm like, at the end of this speech, a lot of you guys are gonna think, wow, this guy is a complete scumbag, and a lot of you guys are gonna think, wow, this is an ingenious guy. I must say the great thing is that both of you are right. Mm-hmm. I'm like, and I'm going to say some things that are offensive, but at the end, if you just give it till the end, I'm going to let you know all of the things that it cost me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right.
Like, and then, at the very end, I go, and the thing is, and I know you know this from doing this many speeches, is that you tend to get 80% of the questions, probably 90%, are the same questions over and over. So you have those canned responses that are great. Yeah. And when I'm telling my story and I get to one point, like I know you don't know my story, but at one point, this is horrific. At one point, I'm like, and you think what you did was bad. Listen to
No,
this.
I listened to the 6 hour.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. So was it in there? Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's when I started surveying homeless people.
Yeah.
And whenever I surveyed, just like I think I did with in that Lex Friedman thing,
Yeah.
when I get to that point, you can see people shifting in the crowd, and I'll always pick somebody out and I'll go, I see you judging me, and people will be like, hey, and everybody roars like, and you have those great to me I have those great setups where I'll say something and everybody roars laughing. But one of the funniest things that happened to me during one of these speeches, and this was probably one of the first speeches I gave, was I went to the Alabama, it was the Alabama Professional Loan Officers or Loan Originators, something. I don't know, you know, annual whatever. And it's in Alabama, and it's an organization, and then they do compliance, they do all of those things. And then they have an annual meeting where they have a speaker come. And I came. Well, when they started announcing who was coming, the Alabama Department of Banking and Finance wrote them a letter saying that they felt that I should not be allowed to speak, and that they wrote this whole 3-4 paragraph letter about how this is the wrong speaker for your event. Because they always invite them to come and speak about changes in the industry.
Right.
The guy gets up on the stage, and there's like 3 or 4 of them. First of all, there's like 400 or 500 people here. There's like this one table where they're all sitting. These are all people from the Department of Banking and Finance. The guy gets up on stage, he talks for 10 minutes, and at the end of the 10, and I knew that the event coordinator had told me, listen, the guy that's about to get up and talk, she's like, we have gotten some blowback. We've had a few emails that people have said this and this. We've never had that before. They're like,
this before you even talk.
Before I've even spoken for because they've been promoting it for like a month or so, and they've been telling, hey, this is our keynote speaker. And some people are like, wow, she's like, we gotten way more. That's great. What did I watch this guy before? She's like, we've gotten 3 or 4 people have been like, hey man, I don't think you should be giving this guy credence or his story. But when the Department of Banking and Finance guy gets up, he does a whole little speech, and at some point he kind of looks over at me and he says, well, I know you guys didn't come here to hear me speak. He said, so I'm going to step down now. He said, but I want everyone to know that mortgage fraud or bank fraud, is illegal in the state of Alabama. And he looks at me, and I'm thinking he's joking, right? And I'm like, and I kind of laugh, and I look at the coordinator who I'm sitting next to, and she like glances, and I realize like everybody's super serious, and he's serious, and I'm like, and I'm laughing, I'm like. And I sat there and I thought, oh my God. He scowls at me, and then he gets off stage, and he's a chubby guy, waddles off stage and goes down. And then she gets up and says, hey, we have our keynote speaker, blah, blah. And I get up and I do my speech. And I forget what it was. At one point when I said, I was on the run. And at this point, I said, to get identities, I realized that my best course of action was to get people that aren't using their identities. And I devise a scheme to start stealing homeless people's identities. And I look right at him and I go, I see you judging me like that. And he turned beet red. You could tell he was, and that whole table, it was, I mean, looking back, it was, but even at the time I was like super nervous. Like I said, second, third, maybe 4th time I've ever done this. But at the end of the whole, and by the way, as soon as I was done speaking, like he got up and laughed, they laughed. But you're right. People would come up to me, and people were bringing my book to me. Hey, people were saying, man, this one woman said, listen, my brother wanted me to tell you, he's extremely disappointed that he didn't get to come, and that he has watched all of your podcasts, and he's, so she starts telling me, subscribe, blah, blah, blah. And that he really, really wanted to meet you and asked if you would sign his book, that he has a copy of your book. And I signed it. And she said, he's a financial investigator for the Alabama state like department, like the police department, like the state department. She's like, he just really wanted to meet you. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, this is an investigator for the police department that wanted to meet me and was so disappointed because he couldn't get off work. And she's like, I told him like a couple of days ago, and he was so upset because he couldn't get he tried to get it changed. And I was like, this is so cool. But I was going to say another one that I went to, which is fun because it's all kind of the same thing. They come up, they want you to sign books, they want you to take tell you something, have a question. This is after the 20 or 30 minutes of the Q&A.
Yeah.
I did one where it was, I've done a few cyber conventions, right? Cybersecurity, which I'm always like, look, the first one I did, I said, I don't really feel like I fit into this genre or this industry. And they were like, no, what you did was social engineering. And that's a lot of what cybersecurity is, where you socially engineer your way into a position. And they explained it. And they were like, that's what most of these hacks are. Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. I didn't realize that. So I kind of I talk more about social engineering. But when I was done with that, the industry as a whole are kind of computer geeks, and they're all in their 20s, early 30s maybe. And it was like being a rock star. I mean, I must have taken 30 or 40 selfies. Yeah. Guys are getting together, taking pictures with me. I mean, nobody at the credit union convention wanted a selfie. Yeah. These guys are like, bro, I watch all your stuff. Can I get a selfie, man? I'm like, this is nuts. And even their setup, like they had smoke machines, and it wasn't like a podium. They're all wearing earpieces, and they've got like a light show.
Did you have walk-up music on the stage? When you walked up?
They did. I didn't. They might have. They were playing. I didn't give them music or anything. Yeah. Like I understand you actually have like a slideshow. I just get up and start talking. And they always ask like, do you have a PowerPoint? No. No, it's just me.
My slide is just pictures and the storytelling. It's like, and I have a picture of a swimming pool, not the swimming pool.
Right.
So like, is that the swimming pool? No, I didn't go there and take the picture of a swimming pool. That's something there. But you're right. And I find it's only happened a handful of times here where somebody in the crowd would be the wise ass and be like, how do you feel about making money off your crime? They're paying you. And like, but usually the crowd all turns to that, and all the eyes go on that person. They're like, that's not what he's doing. And then they get sort of like, I think we can see here that this is not what I'm doing. I'm providing insights that are preventative today, hopefully for certified fraud examiners. But that one question, if somebody's not buying it and hates you, like I felt the same. All the 400 eyes go on that person, like, and so that person.
To me, I've had that question, and unlike you, like I mean, you're saying you're kind of an introvert. Yeah. Like I'm always like I'm good with it. Okay, I'm good with it. This is what I'm doing. I don't do things for free. Yeah. You certainly don't. This is how I make my living. Right. I'm limited on how I can make my living, and I think this story helps. Yeah. Next question. Like I just shut that person down and move. Yeah. The other one is, I had one the other day, which was about like, and obviously the guy while I was talking, he had read, I've optioned my life rights story, right? Well, and he was like, well, I understand that you optioned your life rights story, and what if you make, you still owe $6 million, and what are you going to do about it? And I was just like, oh, Jesus. Like, I can't believe, this guy was, and I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to make $6 million, so I'm going to pay restitution based on what I recoup for the actual life rights. But that's really, I also have an agreement with the federal government to make payments. Yeah. So however it works out, that's what I'm going to abide by my agreement. He's like, okay, so the answer is just yes. Right. And I thought, and you could tell everybody's looking at that person at this point. And I was like, yeah, I guess. Yeah, that's yes. It was just like he came off kind of like a jackass. Yeah. But typically everybody's very, very cordial, very polite, I never really have anybody. I could tell in his voice he was kind of a jerk off. Yeah. But I
found when I go overseas too, they're actually even more receptive because it's sort of a different thought that he's reformed now. He helped the FBI. Now he's doing this. Whereas in the U.S., there's sometimes more of a punitive culture. Like once you're a fraudster, you're always a fraudster. Right. That it just overseas, like you mentioned the pictures, and when I go to Asia, it's like everybody lines up to take pictures, and it's sort of, it's fun there. And the story translates overseas because when I started traveling for talks, it's like FBI, wire wearing, are they going to understand it? Like it still lands overseas because the FBI can work with law enforcement in other countries to bring cases. If they're trading U.S. stocks over there, they can still bring cases, so it still resonates.
So right now, though, the problem is, and I understand you're doing X amount of talks, but I think this was kind of like with what Walt had told me. He's like, at some point, he's like, you've talked to everybody.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
He's like,
yeah.
and he said the circle gets smaller and smaller.
Right.
And he said, so you get to a point, he's like, so you have to, understand that this may not be, he had mentioned forever, but at the rate I'm going, it will be forever because I do one every 2 months.
Yeah.
But you're actually I need to talk to you about how to make a real, push for, because if I could do one a month,
Yeah.
if I could do 1 or 2 a month, like, wow,
Be
that
nice.
would be great.
Yeah.
And I do love doing them.
Right.
They're super cool to do. It's a really interesting, and you do feel great about afterward.
Yeah.
But I was going to say, but you're, but then again, I guess you're not going to run out of compliance, right?
Yeah,
and you're also,
and there's new employees. So even my clients from 7 years ago, I'll pit them up. Hey, if half the company's new from 7 years ago, I'm happy to come back. And even the guys that heard it 7 years ago, they're not going to be like, no, don't bring this really compelling speaker back.
Right.
And then when you do it, you have more insights from not just your own story, but other clients that have had me in. Hey, you know what? Here's this story. But also last week, I was speaking to this company where they actually went through an investigation. They told me about, we had NDAs because I worked that into my presentation about, here's the Tipper X story. And by the way, this happened last year because compliance is like, make sure you customize it based on what happened here with this employee we can't talk about, because with employment law, they can't mention the person's name, but I worked that in. So that keeps it fresh. But to your point too, I don't see myself at age 60 being like, hey, I'm wearing a wire in the swimming pool or whatever. Maybe I'll still share that story, but it's going to have to evolve, and it has for Walt too. So I kind of have to figure out, I like doing it, and I was still busiest pre-COVID because it was more fresh then or whatever. So I have to figure out how I'm going to keep this going. Maybe another line of business around the story, or maybe courses or that type of thing. So I can kind of, if the speaking were to slow down, I might have something else I can sort of fall back on and keep going.
It's funny. I had a guy locally who has, I don't know what they've got. They've got like 100 and some odd brokers, maybe 200 brokers, but they only have maybe 30 or so that are in the office.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a building. This is right downtown Tampa. And I remember the guy sent me a thing. Hey, listen, I really need to talk to you. I own a brokerage. Well, he owns a lender. He's a lender, but I have a bunch of loan officers in here. He's like, and I recently caught a broker that he had provided 1040s or altered his clients' 1040s. Mm-hmm. He said, which is, shocking to us. He said, but what was more shocking is that he said, when we confronted him on it, obviously it was him. Mm-hmm. He said he really tried to normalize it. He really tried to say it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. What is the big deal? Why are you guys making such a big deal about this? He said, and we've got 200 loan officers. He's like, and I'd like to think it is a big deal. Yep. He's like, but I'm not sure. At the way he reacted, he told me the way he reacted made me think this is something everybody's doing. And I'm like, what? He's like, he didn't say that, but the way he reacted was like, it's not a big deal, bro. Like, this happens all the time.
Yeah.
He said he didn't say everybody here's doing it, but the way he said so he was like, bro, he's like, what would you charge me to come talk to my brokers? Yeah. And he's like, we only have about 30 or 40 in the office, in the conference room. He said, but everybody else will be on like a webinar.
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'll come talk to you. So I drove down there. It was right in Tampa.
Yeah.
That was a while ago, like a year or so ago. Do you remember me mentioning this?
I remember that a while ago.
Yeah. And I went in and I talked to him, but it was because typically I know that in these companies, like, they have people, but this was one where this guy this is like one of the owners, and I mean, panicked. Yeah. I talked to him. He was just like, and then when I was done, I remember I was leaving. He and the other owner walked me to the elevator, and he was like, listen, he said, like, I'd seen you on a podcast or two. He said, and you kind of joke around about it. I was a little afraid that you were going to make it seem, cool.
Or glamorize it.
Yeah, glamorize it. He said, but you didn't do that. He said, bro, this is so much better than I thought, because of course I don't do all that in that, it's a serious
talking to company training.
Yeah, it's a serious situation. Like, I talk about I talk about underwriting, I talk about processing, I talk about all those things and all the different situations that come up that are I go into all of that way more than I do when I tell it's not entertainment. This isn't entertainment. Right. This is, but that was super cool, because I remember he told me later, and I typically get those. You get those emails later where they say, "Listen, we got a bunch of emails from people that said, wow, this was amazing." No,
that's really fulfilling when you hear that.
Yeah.
Like, they keep talking about it, and it sparks conversation. Years later, even some of my clients would be like, "Oh, one of our employees came and realized they were rationalizing something, and you don't really know you're doing it until you're doing, or you hear somebody talk about that and they came and asked the right questions and we got to the heart of this. But it's interesting because it always does start with that small decision. Like the 1040 guy figured like, well, this is normalized behavior or everybody does it, is a common thing for people to fall prey to. So if we can relate our own stories to something that they might be experiencing, then that's a really, I think, a preventative, thing. And so much of it too is like the culture inside the company where people talk about like tone at the top of the organization. And I always say tone is just a signal. It's like the behaviors that you see is how things become normalized. So one definition I have for culture is like the behaviors employees believe will put them ahead. Like that's really like what the culture is. It's not the tone at the top or the poster on the wall. Like that can be hypocritical. It's not actually, but that's how things start.
Did you ever write a book?
So I'm working on, I have a book proposal now that I'm shopping to like the big 5 publishers.
Right.
And I'm working with a young writer director on a scripted rights situation right now. And so we're hoping to get a scripted rights sort of pilot or something written up. The book people, because I'm not famous or don't have a huge following, they're like, this is a great story, but he's not famous. So like somebody but they're like, hey, if he sells a scripted rights situation to a streamer, then we'll buy the book rights. So it's sort of a chicken egg thing right now. But I feel like this could definitely be like a movie or...
Yeah, you could. I mean, you could always just publish it on Amazon. I mean, you're doing. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, a lot of people do that too. Just because that would be my business card for speaking engagements. Hey, here's my book. And,
and not just that. Whenever you do the speaking engagement, they always want you to. I almost never do. They're always like, "Hey, can you bring like 20 or 30 books?" And it's always like, I really hate the idea of peddling books.
Yeah, exactly.
But what you can do is you just get a printed card.
The code
with the QR code and just with the name of the book, say, "Boom, here's you can buy it here," or or you could do a different one. Say if you buy here, if you scan it and buy it here.
Yeah.
Like I have my books on Etsy. Like if you buy the book on Etsy, I sign those books.
Yeah, you could do that way too. Yeah.
But the scripted series, you could option your life rights or and then people would yell at you for you're making money off of for God's sakes, it was $46,000.
So looking at that, and that would probably then get me a bigger platform for other industries, like just not just finance, or like you said, the circle at some point starts to slow down. That'll open it up, or have hopefully a bigger platform for this. So that's my goal the next 12 months, to have something like that happen. And it's fun to have a creative project going. Just now, so.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such a I almost said Wolf of Wall Street story. It's such a Wall Street story. The only difference is at the end of Wall Street, when Bud Fox gets grabbed, he wears a wire against Gecko, but the whole thing's over within 5 minutes. The whole thing's over. Where yours would expand on that part. Still, I mean, it's very much like that. Especially you're so young. You were just like a baby, bro. You're like you're 25, 26, 27.
Yeah, brain's not developed till like 25 for men, right? So, maybe not even now.
I'm not prepared for this.
Exactly. Yeah. That's 28, 29. And like, everybody in their 40s and 50s can look back at themselves in their 20s and have some like wisdom. And I think what I was saying earlier, I think, is like, I was just drowning in insecurity because these other guys were cheating to get ahead, when it's easier to say than done. But like, if I had just been focused on myself, improving as a trader and an analyst, and just competing against myself and not drowning in that insecurity, it's easy to say now, but maybe when she calls me, this is happening, I could just be like, look, we don't do that here. By the way, I'm hanging up the phone. Don't call me again. Like that takes a lot of moral courage, maybe in that situation, to say no and have, I can't, as we say, can't change now. I can only just make decisions now to like, what should I be doing now? And like, sharing the story, and hopefully it's preventative. But.
Oh, Raj.
Yeah.
Julian did a whole podcast on Raj.
Yeah.
Julian Doherty.
Who is that guy? What's his story?
Huge. Yeah, huge. Was he hedge fund or just investor?
Hedge fund. So the woman that had called me had worked for him, and he was sentenced to 11 years. I think he served maybe 9. I think it was like Kim Kardashian helped him get out because his health wasn't good or something. So he got out a little bit early and then wrote a book.
He managed to make it. Well, I mean, it can't be, but the health issue couldn't possibly be because he's 150 pounds overweight. Maybe slow down on the eating, Raj. I don't know what's happening. But he did Julian's. I didn't know Kim Kardashian.
I think she helped him out. Yeah.
But he had written a book, and I remember Julian, my buddy Julian. He said, because one time I asked him, I said, do you ever prepare for your stuff? Because I have a buddy who's always like, well, your buddy Julian clearly prepares. I'm like, no, Julian's just smart. He's smarter than me. I'm not preparing. And so I'm arguing with my buddy. And then I asked Julian, I said, tell him that, you never prepare, do you? He said, the only one I ever prepared for, and I think he's done since then he's done a few more, is with Raj's, and he read his book.
Okay.
He goes, because it was such a complicated case, is what he said.
How do you explain this? Yeah.
And but yeah, he did almost a 4-hour podcast with him.
Oh, okay.
And I want to say that the Raj almost the entire time, and I could be wrong. Some of you might watch the podcast and be like, he admits he did stuff wrong, but I think almost the whole time it was like it was all bullshit. It was set up. I didn't do anything. I didn't. Yeah. So
no, I was so close to it. I knew what was going on. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. Just to clarify, you didn't wear a wire on this guy Raj that you guys are talking about?
No.
Yeah.
But he's like at the top of the pyramid, and then like the one woman worked for him,
right?
And she's spreading. It's funny in Wall Street they explain that, because they do that in Wall Street where they're calling up, but they have it super cool. They have they're like was it Blue Star loves.
Oh, Endicott, Blue Horseshoe loves Endicott Steel.
Yeah, they had like code words. He would call guys at different firms, and then they would buy the stock. But they were was it kind of a pump, or were they?
That was more. They were going to be acquired, and so they knew about the takeout before it happened.
Okay, so they were able to short it,
and they were able to actually get in before the company was taken over.
Okay,
and so they were making money. Then they would sell it when the stock was up 30%.
Right.
On the takeover.
So he had a huge network on. Gecko did.
Yeah.
I can't believe, bro.
Yeah.
You have to watch Wall Street.
Oh, it's a seminal quote. Greed is good. That was his.
Absolutely.
Quote.
Yeah. He does a whole speech on greed.
Yeah.
Gecko. I mean, that's to this name. Everybody in Wall Street knows who Gecko is.
Yeah.
It's just saying, like, you're a bro, don't be a gecko.
Yeah. Michael Douglas.
Yeah.
Best character, probably. Yeah.
And then they did a second. Then they did Money Never Sleeps.
Oh, that's right.
They did a second one where he gets out of prison and he's got a book and he does keynote speeches, and that's a great one,
I have
too.
to actually watch it.
Have you never watched
No, I've never
that?
seen the sequel.
Oh, my God. It's great.
Okay,
It's a great one. Because he does a whole turn. It
was in the last 10 years, right? Or I mean, it was years after the first one.
Huge thing. His ex-wife went and sued him because she was like, I'm supposed to get residuals off of any movies that turn into where they do a second movie. And the argument was, this isn't a sequel. They had some other name for it. It's like, come on, bro. The character gets out of prison.
Yeah.
It's a sequel. So,
that's right.
But go ahead. Sorry.
Similar.
So what?
So the lady who gave you the tip in the beginning, did she only call you, or did she give multiple people
She probably
tips?
had a bunch of
It was
people.
actually like she called Raj, and I think she was the main person who wired up on Raj. So she only got, I think, 1 year in prison when her guideline was looking at much more, but because she helped them out with Raj, she got that credit. And so she was talking to me. She was talking to one client in New York, in Raj, like 3 or 4 people. And so she wasn't talking to a whole lot of people.
She
so
had
I think
a couple dozen people or something.
She had done this before. So back in 2001, they were trying to build a case against Raj, and they knocked on her door in 2007 or 6, and they're like, we can't believe you did this again. You're a recidivist. Here's the lawyer you used last time.
This is what I do.
So exactly.
You know
that's sort of like her 60 Minutes interview. It was sort of like, this is what I did. And so they're like, who did you tell? And Raj, this guy in New York, and this knucklehead 28-year-old Tom Hardin. They're like, who was that? Could you go meet him? And I think that's where I got roped into this. Whereas plenty of guys probably traded Hilton didn't get caught because they didn't know her. They was sort of different webs,
right? Like you calling your buddy and that whole firm doing that. They don't know her.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So that's how that part was set up. Yeah.
With some of the people that you wore wire on, do you know like maybe the most amount of money someone made personally, and maybe like the longest someone was locked up?
I think the longest somebody got was like 5 years, but the money I don't know because it was in funds and then they get percentage of the funds, so I'm not sure. I know of all these cases, it was like $700 million of everybody of these 85 people, which, that pales in comparison to like the mortgage-backed security stuff, which I never prosecuted anything
right.
there. But yeah, I don't know the exact numbers. Yeah.
Have you ever made contact, or has anybody ever contacted you since then?
I haven't heard from anybody in these cases. I always look people up, and I think a lot of people, we were talking about this before, use these reputation managers where they take all the bad stuff off.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you get these emails too, like, this AI email, Mr. Thomas Hardin, I found this indictment about you. We could take this off. I'm like, no, actually, here's my website. I'm open for speaking engagements.
Right.
Don't take the bad stuff off.
Right.
Keep it on. But I think a lot of people clean up their Google in these situations. Yeah.
When you were doing that, were there any like unique ways that these guys were, getting this information other than just getting a tip from somebody?
Yeah, so there were tips. There was one situation where a woman was tipping a few analysts who work for Steve Cohen, which was SAC Capital, and he's now the owner of the New York Mets. So a couple, like 13 of his guys went to prison, and a woman was tipping them with information, and they were giving her. It's a weird story. Like she actually liked, I think, crabs or something, and so they would ship her like stone crabs or something. These quid pro quos for the information. She's just like, I want food or something. So that was weird. One guy that worked at SAC, he flipped on like his best man in his wedding and was like wearing a wire at a wedding or something in a situation. So there was these odd stories. I think one guy had like tips written down on paper and like, swallowed the paper type of thing, something like very juvenile. Yeah.
Right. What I was going to say, I wonder what Raj was offered, because he went to trial, didn't he?
He went to trial. I'll have to read. I just heard him on CNBC, like the one interview. And to your point, I didn't want to read his book after that because he was sort of like, the system is screwed up. Look at this, how I'm a victim. Like, I knew exactly what was going on. And like,
right.
For him, the way I look at it, was like 90% of what he was doing was legit. It was just a small part that was not. And so I'll have to listen to that show. But
what they offered him?
Oh, what they offered him? I'm not sure what the deal was before he went to trial, but he was all.
Because even to go to trial at that dollar amount and lose and get whatever he got, 10 years.
I think he got sentenced to 10 or 11 instead of 9.
10 or 11. I mean, usually like they'll come in, they're like, look, plead guilty, we'll give you 4 years or 3 years. And then you go to trial, you lose. Usually they give you 20 years.
Right,
it's like 10 times or 5 times as much. So even, especially with those the dollar amounts, I mean, he had to be just off the chart.
Yeah.
Let's see. Were there any times other than the pool that you had kind of a close call with getting caught with the wire?
There wasn't anything like that. And like that, like there was just situations where people would change the subject very quickly. So I suspected that they were onto me, but there was never. I'm trying to think. There was nothing, it sort of went from people changing the subject to this guy invited me to go swimming, but there was nothing really in between.
Do you think now, like 2024, the technology's got to be way better? Like you're not wearing like what do you think they're like someone who's
now they're
probably
listening. Yeah, now they're probably listening actively. They're probably in a van or they're in the car listening to the conversation.
And there's probably nothing on the actual person, you think?
Well, there's like cards that they have like for cell phones. Like my cell phone, I could have a card in here on the back or something and put it down.
Yeah, so super.
But they're listening, I think, contemporaneously too. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting, insider trading. How much is it still happening? Like how much does the SEC catch or the FBI catch? The latest, because I speak at schools, I know professors who research this stuff. Like, okay, here's what's happening in the market. How much are they catching? And the latest research is like they only catch about 15% of what actually happens, even though they can bring about 50 cases a year, so one a week. They're not catching all of it.
They can only bring 50 cases. Like what?
Well, that's not what they can only do, but that's about, if you look every year how many cases are brought, that's about what it is. And I think the challenge with the SEC is they have like a $2 billion enforcement budget. And you think about all the bad actors in the world combined have billions and billions of dollars more in terms of how they can do the bad acts. And so you read the 50 cases now, and it's always like, oh, I can see this person had this information. They called their uncle in the stock market. He traded, probably took the SEC 5 minutes. The more professional cases, the more sort of organized crime is happening. And I think the SEC, just as a regulator, overworked, underpaid, under-resourced, they don't have sort of the resources to bring down some of these major networks that are happening just because of a budget or not really a focus by them to bring down these bigger rings. And so what's happening now is it's like more organized crime where they'll hack a company's website, maybe through phishing, get through an employee, and then start trading that company's stock around the earnings announcements or the takeovers. And so it's a more complicated case for the regulators to investigate. And I think just it's sort of like, all right, we can get this guy every week who's making $46,000, knucklehead, scare him, and then get that. And the average disgorgement by the SEC in these cases is $58,000. So they're not catching occasionally they get the multi-million-dollar ones for PR.
Right.
But usually it's like $58,000. Some guy blew up his career for what's the point,
Do these guys have any type of restitution that they have to pay back? Or let's say they've been doing this for years and they've made hundreds, if not, $100,000, $1 million. Like, do they have to pay that back?
Yeah, it all has to be paid back. There's restitution. In my case, we thought on the 46th that there might be a penalty too, but there was no penalty beyond that. So for me, it was
It's like who is the victim? Who am I paying this to? The government can't get a
right.
You know, there was a time, I want to say the law changed in like 2009 or something, where the government they were giving fines and restitution payments just on a whim, like, and there was $12 million in loss. The problem was that there was no way to account for where that $12 million was going, and the Supreme Court ended up saying, listen, you can't arbitrarily stick people with millions of dollars in loss because you're keeping it.
Yeah.
Like, we have nobody to pay that. You owe $12 million, you have to pay it, but we don't have anybody to attribute to that. So we're just going to keep it. So it ended up being a windfall for the government, and the Supreme Court eventually said, wait a second, unless you can prove where this money's going to go, you can't just say.
Yeah.
Because like with mine, initially they said there was like 20 million in there, $26 million in loss. And then it went down to like 16. And then my pre-sentence report said 9.5. And then I was like, I'd love to see where you're figuring out there's 9.5 million. Then they said 6 million.
Yeah.
And I was like, they can just make that up. And my lawyer was like, yeah, they can. So I got stuck with 6 million. But then a couple of years later, the Supreme Court said, you can't do that.
Yeah.
But guess who's still stuck paying 6 million? Because there's no way that they can figure out where the 6 million is.
Right. They can't show you the math. Like, show your work. Like,
that'd be too much work.
Yeah, exactly.
So I have a question real quick. Can you, I know you can't buy and sell stock for other people, but can you own stock in a company as a felon?
So I can't have a personal trading account in my name. So I have through my company, I can have like a retirement only at Vanguard. So Vanguard is just what's called ETF. So if you buy the S&P 500, that's all I can do. So I can have that, or I can just, have exposure to the stock market through an index fund. So I can't trade single issue or single stocks.
So you can't buy 10 shares of Ford.
Right.
And hold it for 10 years and then sell it.
I can't ever touch single stocks again. I have a lifetime ban through that.
You do. Is that all felons? Like, could I buy it?
I think for financial frauds, that's a good. Yeah. Also, I've had issues with, I'd be curious, like checking accounts at any major bank. I can't, like I have a checking account at a credit union. I haven't been able to open a checking account ever.
I have one at Wells Fargo.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do. But the halfway house had a deal with them that allowed you to open one. I know other people that you're not allowed. And I turned around I was still in the halfway house, and I opened an account at Bank of America, and like a week later, they closed the account and sent my money back. But I owe Bank of America like $2 million, and I feel like they're holding resentment.
Yeah.
So,
but I always get these letters, Mr. Hardin, you have 30 days to close your account, and I knew it had to do with my case. One day, a retail banker called me. He's like, "Tom, you're on every AML list in the world." I go, "What's AML?" He's like, "You're a potential money launderer to any bank in the world." I'm like, "Money laundering?" But he's like, "Because it's a financial crime."
Did you say that?
This again? I would never do that.
That's crazy.
And so I have some credit union, where at least. And so that's
I'm strictly stock fraud.
Yeah, exactly.
Did you tell them that?
It's money laundering. I mean, it's not money laundering, but I can own a little bit of Bitcoin because that's not right now. So that's actually been okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
My only perception of the Wall Street culture is from the Wolf of Wall Street. Now, I'm sure it's not as extreme as that, but does that kind of party culture existed where you worked, or how was that?
Yeah. So that Wolf of Wall Street was more like, ripping off grannies and stuff, pump and dumps. That's not much what I was working in. That's kind of changed now, but there is, at that time, like, I was going, the brokers, we were the clients of the brokers. So they would take us on these lavish trips to the Kentucky Derby, or, going to the Super Bowls and playing flag football with Michael Vick. Like that was our strip clubs. That was part of it. But today it's kind of like, there's so much regulation that there's a lot less of that going on.
Extremism.
Yeah. The extremism, because it's just sort of looked down upon.
Yeah.
I forgot to mention too, like where insider trading is. We could talk about Congress too.
Listen, I almost was going to bring up Nancy Pelosi and
every
all
conference.
of them.
Every conference I speak at, they're like, they got you for 46,000, but Paul Pelosi, and it's not just her. It's like there's this thing called the Stock Act. So it was legal for Congress to do it until 2012. There's a Stock Act, and they said you have to file all your stock trades with us, or you have to pay a $200 fine. And so what they started doing in their relatives' accounts was the trades happen. So Paul Pelosi, or I think it was even on the Republicans like Dan Crenshaw, Tommy Tuberville, were also doing this where they would violate the Stock Act and pay a $200 fine. So of the 400 some odd people in the House and the Senate, like 97 people actually violated the Stock Act in 2022. But it's like, yeah, I'll make $4 million on this trade and pay a $200 fine. Congress over the years has tried to put bills forth to outlaw this. And it's actually the one thing where like,
but they
both
have to
parties can come
regulate
together,
themselves.
but they have to regulate themselves. And so there's a bill actually on the Senate floor this week, which I don't think is going to pass. And it's got bipartisan support. Actually, it's like AOC and Matt Gaetz actually agree. This is the only thing they probably agree on is this is getting this bill forward. The problem with the bill in Congress this week is they say if you trade single stocks, the penalty will be 10% of your gains. It's like, well, yeah, that's a tax on. I'll make a $4 million trade if I'm Paul Pelosi and I'll pay $400,000. Of course, the ROI is actually very nice. Yeah. And this bill says it doesn't start till 2027. So do all your insider trading now the next 3 years. And
it's still not going to pass.
And the other problem is if you come into office, you have to sell all the stocks you own, which I feel like once you come into office, then you can't trade. So if Trump gets elected, he would have to sell his Truth Social stock, which doesn't make sense. So why would you run for office? So I don't think it's going to pass. If they just said the bill is once you get elected, you cannot trade stocks. And if you do, you're going to be prosecuted like anybody else would be. I don't know why they can't get there, but I think because they make the laws, they want to keep doing it. So I don't see it changing. But I always get that question at the conference, why can they do it? It's just they make the laws.
Right.
And you think most of the inside information just comes from them knowing what the laws that will change and affect businesses? Or how do you think they're getting their inside information?
There's people that, with it happening today, there's just people that share information that work on deals. So bankers, lawyers, accountants that work on these takeovers, and they'll just people that slip up and share information, or they're not thinking, or they'll you read these cases and it's usually like there's three friends who are, one friend's the lawyer, he's tipping his college buddies, and then he gets a kickback for $40,000 or a vacation. And it's just like,
well, there was one where Nancy Pelosi, like a week before whoever it was, the government filed suit against like Google, she goes in and they sell all their Google stock. Yeah. Like you've got, they have, $10 million in Google, she and her husband, they sell it, and a week later, boom, the government files a lawsuit against Google. And of course the stock takes a drop. Well, she knows ahead of time.
Yeah. Yeah. So losses avoided is a big thing too. They sometimes don't catch. Like you can see the gains, but avoiding those losses, you don't see it, but it's actually too, a huge thing. Yeah.
Or if you find out let's say 8 months later, she finds out they're going to settle. She goes in and buys, $10 million worth of stock, and they find out that they settle, and guess what? The stock shoots up. Like, hey, nobody's going to prison. They settled for a reasonable amount. Yeah. And the stock shoots back up. Like they have this. Sometimes it's just insider knowledge that they have. I mean, sometimes obviously people are, you'd scratch our back and we're going to give you this tip.
Yeah. And defense stocks, it's really prevalent too. And sort of like, hey, we're going to give more money to Ukraine or whatever. This is going to help this vendor or whatever. And they're going to buy that stock. And back in February 2020, there was 3 senators who found out about, oh shit, this pandemic's going to be horrible. And I forget his name now. In February, he sold all of his like hotel stocks. Like, oh yeah, people are probably going to stop traveling. And so in February 2020, sells his stocks, never even investigated.
Can you imagine? And then he votes for the bill to have everybody stop being able to travel.
Yeah, everybody stay home.
Yeah. I feel like that was.
You avoid some losses there.
Yeah.
So you say on some of your speaking engagements, it's not just like stocks and insider trading. There's other things like you said, bribing doctors. Like what are some other, I guess, industries that you kind of speak to, or things that go on that you would apply to?
Yeah, like so highly regulated industries. So not just insider trading, but when there's bribery. So medical devices is a big one where the med tech person or the rep is visiting the doctors, and even if you buy them like 2 glasses of wine, you're actually breaking some of the rules, and that can be something where you're charged for paying a bribe, even though it's not actually like a cash payoff. FCPA is the federal corruption law where people travel overseas, salesmen in a country that has totally different laws where corruption is more normalized can get in trouble for paying a middleman to get a deal done, which is actually very common. Like, hey, I'm in this country in Africa to get this big defense contract. I have to pay this guy and he's going to take care of it. And you can totally rationalize it like, all right, that's how it's done. And actually, no, you're an American working for an American company. We're going to put you in prison because even though you're in this country in Africa, you actually violated the laws here. So that's very common for sort of where's white collar crime happening today.
So on your speaking engagements, what's kind of like some of your best points for these people to avoid this?
So, in my situation, again, the boss comes in, was clearly telling me to do something unethical. I always tell young people to ask clarifying questions. And, is what we're going to do here. I don't know if my boss would have snapped out of it and said, of course, we're not going to insider trade. Because, again, he's like looking the other way later anyway, so he knows.
Right.
And he was actually never charged, which I was shocked by. So it's important for people to ask clarifying questions. I think just get outside your own head. In my 20s, I had the right mentor and said, you won't believe what's going on. Raj is doing it. Steve Cohen's doing it. This woman just called me. I'm thinking about doing it one time. I think the right mentor would have slapped me around. Tom, here's that iceberg underwater. Here's that reward you're seeing. Here's that risk you're not seeing at 28 years old. I think just sharing what I was seeing would have maybe helped me change direction, so not acting in isolation. And also when I speak at companies, they're like, can you review our code of conduct, our code of ethics? Like, it's always like, ask these 10 questions to yourself if you're ever at that line. And for me, the one question is, if I make this decision, am I willing to be held accountable? At the end of the day, that's all it's about. Like, we can't be in every sort of situation every time where you might be, but if you make that decision, if you decide to wipe that out or whatever, are you going to be held accountable for that decision? And I think that's all. I want to rep up these codes of conduct, or you're not asking yourself 10 questions. It's the one question.
Yeah.
So why do you think your wife stayed with you?
No, it's great. It's a great question. The 19 years last month. So very lucky. It's devout Catholic, so that I think that helps, for better or for worse. So this was definitely a for worse situation. And I think, not to say she knew who I was, but she knew I messed up. Like, she could kind of she just put trust in me, like, hey, you're going to get us out of this somehow and figure out how to get back on your feet. But I think if she were to ever want to talk about this, her side of this would be very interesting to a lot of people, a lot of groups. Like, how'd you stay with this guy? And so I don't have a great answer for that, but it's just, here we are, you know? And so I always say, if I'm traveling a lot, am I too busy? Am I traveling too much? She's like, you didn't work for about 10 years. You can keep speaking. It's good. And now the kids are older. And with my kids now too, it's great. They're 14 and 12. So they can, at first they're like, oh, my dad committed a crime. And he goes and talks about it. The other kids are like, my dad's a fireman. What's he doing? So, but now I can see their own slippery slopes where they come home and they're like, hey, everybody Googles the answers to the homework. I'm going to do that too. I'm like, actually, stop there. This is where it starts. Actually, 14 years old. Right. You start crossing these lines, or now in high school, the English teachers are like, they're all using ChatGPT. I'm like, well, this is where the cheating starts. And if that starts to get normalized through your life, all of a sudden you're 28 years old buying stocks. It's the same behavior. So
I was gonna say the ChatGPT thing. It's what's funny about that. I heard it was like a TikTok or something where there was this where she said they send out the assignments to the kids, whatever they shoot them out through email or whatever they do. And so she said what the kids are doing is they'll just highlight the whole thing and they'll put it in ChatGPT and put, write me a paper on this subject. And she's like, and then it spits it out. So what she does is she said, I end up putting somewhere in there between the paragraphs or at the end of the paragraph or beginning. She said, I'll write something completely erroneous in there about, and make sure and relate it to Bram Stoker's Dracula or just something. And then I highlight it and I change it to white. So that if you're looking at it, you can't see it. But when they highlight the whole thing and they drop it in ChatGPT says, oh, and I have to relate this to Frankenstein or Dracula. And then I get these papers that are like, they start throwing in these references. She's like, the kid doesn't realize it because he thinks, oh, it's fine. They drop it. They're not reading it. Or if they do, they go, okay, well, this must be related. And she's like, oh, I'm catching them left and right.
Or some teachers will be like, here's what ChatGPT has as the answer. I'm giving it to you. Now you have to add on to that or something like that to get around it. But
I guess this would be my last question. So you kind of went, I guess, extended period of time where you're kind of in limbo and you're, probably at the lowest point of your life. What do you think it was for you personally, or what kind of advice would you have for somebody who's kind of going through something similar or kind of at the lowest point of their life? Like, what was it that helped drag you out of that and overcome it, I guess?
Yeah. Again, going back to this idea of shame and guilt, I don't think shame helps anybody. So like, you're not a piece of shit. Stop beating yourself up. And I think you can only have what I call like windshield mentality. Like you can only look forward. You can't be looking in the rearview mirror about what you did. Like you have to learn from it. And so start making like good decisions now. Like you can't, and it's easier for me to say than do, because sometimes I do still feel like, why did I do that? And so, but you have to look forward, and you have to find people in your circle, I think, that are going to support you, and you figure out who your true friends are and lean into that. But I also say you have to lean into the suck. Again, we were talking about before, so many guys like us will want to clean up their Google and not have this be a part of their life again. But I think it's important to lean into it and to do something with it. So all my information is tipperx.com. Now I have that trademarked. I'm happy I'm not Tipper Y, I guess. I don't know. It's tipperx, tipperx.com. And for any companies, I'm on LinkedIn too. So happy to connect, on there. That's probably where I'm busiest.
Hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, hit this bell so you get notified of videos just like this. Also, we're going to leave the tipperx.com link in the description. You just click it and go right there. Also, please leave a comment, share the video to your friends and family, and please consider joining my Patreon. It's $10 a month. We put exclusive Patreon content on Patreon. Sometimes it's just things that there's just no way we could post on YouTube. So please check out my Patreon. $10 a month really does help Colby and I make these videos. Thank you very much. See ya.